Have you ever found yourself reaching for a product you'd never normally consider, simply because a famous actor, musician, or athlete told you to? Maybe you bought a sneaker, a soda, or even a snack just because a celebrity's face was plastered all over the ad. It's a strange phenomenon, isn't it? We know logically that these stars are being paid millions to say they love something, yet something in us still wonders what if they're telling the truth. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the most bizarre corners of American pop culture, celebrity endorsements. But we're not just talking about the standard deals you see every day. No, we're going much, much further. Welcome to a journey through some of the most absurd, hilarious, and downright baffling celebrity endorsement deals in United States history. From A-list actors promoting fast food in ways that defy explanation, to legendary musicians putting their name on products that make absolutely no sense, we've uncovered 33 examples that will leave you equal parts amused and astonished. This isn't just a list, it's a tour through the strange marriage of fame, commerce, and sometimes pure desperation, where logic takes a backseat and spectacle reigns supreme. So sit back, get comfortable, and prepare to question everything you thought you knew about advertising, influence, and just how far some companies are willing to go for a slice of that star-powered magic. We're about to reveal the wild, the weird, and the wonderfully ridiculous moments when celebrities said yes to deals that should have been an immediate no. Let's begin. And where better to begin than with a man who has boldly gone where no pitchman has gone before. We're talking, of course, about the one and only William Shatner. In the late 1990s, the internet was a wild frontier, and a new website called Priceline.com had a novel idea. They wouldn't just sell you a plane ticket or a hotel room, they'd let you name your own price. It was a concept that needed a face, a personality to make it make sense to a public still getting used to the idea of booking travel online. And who did they choose? Not a friendly, trusted news anchor, not a slick, modern celebrity. They chose Captain James T. Kirk himself, but Shatner didn't just show up and read a teleprompter. He fully transformed into a character known as the Priceline negotiator. This wasn't a simple endorsement, it was a performance, dressed in a series of increasingly ridiculous costumes. From a medieval knight to a runaway bride, Shatner would camp it up, using his unique, halting cadence to explain the mechanics of the site in a way that was equal parts bewildering and completely unforgettable. He'd stare directly into the camera with intense sincerity, delivering lines about saving money on a rental car as if he were delivering a Shakespearean soliloquy on the bridge of the Enterprise. The sheer absurdity of it all was the entire point. In a sea of boring, straightforward commercials, Shatner's ads were a surreal event. They embraced the weirdness of the early internet era and turned what should have been a dry financial transaction into a form of entertainment. You didn't just remember Priceline, you remembered the strange, charismatic man who seemed to be having the time of his life selling it to you. He became so inseparable from the brand that for an entire generation, William Shatner wasn't just an actor from Star Trek. He was the guy who could get you a weirdly good deal on a hotel room in Des Moines. It was a gamble that paid off in spectacular fashion, proving that sometimes the most effective way to sell something is to completely abandon any pretense of being normal. Now, if William Shatner taught us that absurdity could be a superpower in advertising, our next endorsement proves that sometimes pure, unadulterated star power can make the most mundane product feel legendary. We're moving from the bridge of the Enterprise to the basketball court to talk about a partnership so enduring and so fundamentally strange that we've almost stopped questioning it. What happens when the most electrifying, competitive, and globally recognized athlete on the planet decides to talk about his underwear? For decades, Michael Jordan wasn't just a basketball player, he was a deity in sneakers. His airness soared above defenders, won championships, and became a cultural icon whose very name was synonymous with excellence, style, and an almost mythical level of cool. So when he signed on with Hanes in 1989, the disconnect was immediate and jarring. Here was a man who could command millions for a shoe deal, a man who defined peak physical performance, sitting in a stark white room and having a deadpan conversation about the comfort and durability of his basic cotton briefs. The commercials themselves were masterpieces of understated oddity. They often featured Jordan alongside other celebrities, most notably the actor and comedian Jimmy Walker, famous for his catchphrase, "Din O Might." The dialogue was never flashy. There were no slam dunks, no highlight reels. Instead, we got Michael Jordan in a sweater, looking directly at the camera and saying with utter sincerity, "It's not just the tag that says Hanes." The sheer normalcy of the setting, combined with Jordan's otherworldly fame, created a bizarre cognitive dissonance. You were watching a god hold a 3-pack of tighty-whities. And that was the genius of it. Hanes wasn't selling fantasy or high-performance athletic gear. They were selling comfort and reliability. By using Jordan, they borrowed his attributes, his quality, his trustworthiness, his winner's mentality, and transferred them directly to a product that had absolutely no glamour. Michael Jordan doesn't settle for second best, so why would he settle for less than comfortable underwear? The campaign ran for over 25 years because it worked. It made an everyday essential feel cooler simply by association, proving that even the most ordinary item could become extraordinary if the right person tells you it's their choice. It was a reminder that beneath the iconic jersey, even the greatest of all time is just a person who appreciates a good, comfortable pair of briefs. But if Michael Jordan lending his cool to underwear was strange, our next example takes the concept of an unlikely pitchman to a whole new level of cultural saturation. We're leaving the basketball court for the boxing ring, but we're not talking about fighting. We're talking about one of the most successful and frankly bizarre product endorsements in history, a story where a fearsome heavyweight champion known for his powerful punches became the unlikely king of the kitchen. This is the tale of George Foreman and his lean, mean, fat-reducing grilling machine. The journey is almost too incredible to believe. George Foreman was a 2-time world heavyweight boxing champion, an Olympic gold medalist, and a man whose public persona was built on sheer, intimidating power. His most famous fight, the Rumble in the Jungle against Muhammad Ali in 1974, cemented his image as a brutal, unstoppable force. So how does a man like that end up as the smiling, jovial face of a countertop electric grill? The story begins not with a marketing brainstorm, but with a near tragedy. After a spiritually transformative experience following a boxing match in 1977, Foreman retired from the sport and became an ordained minister. For years, he was out of the public eye, preaching at his church in Houston, Texas. He was famous, but his fame was from a previous era. His comeback in the late 1980s at the age of 45 was a feel-good story that reintroduced him to America, but this time with a new, friendly personality. He was no longer the brooding menace of the 70s. He was a cheerful, self-deprecating grandfather figure. It was this new persona that caught the attention of the manufacturers of a new kind of indoor grill. The product itself was clever. It heated from both the top and bottom, cooking food quickly while draining away excess fat into a handy drip tray. But it needed a name, a face, a story. They approached Foreman, and the rest is, as they say, history. The sheer absurdity was the hook. Here was a man who once knocked out other giants for a living, now standing in a commercial, smiling ear to ear, and talking about how his grill could make a healthy burger. The contrast was pure comedy gold, but Foreman's genius was in his delivery. He wasn't just reading lines, he was selling a lifestyle. He'd hold up the grill with genuine affection, talk about feeding his 5 sons, all named George, which became a hilarious running gag, and proudly declare that he wasn't just selling a product, he was selling George. The name itself became the product. It wasn't just a grill, it was a George Foreman grill. The success was absolutely astronomical. It transcended mere endorsement. Foreman licensed his name to the product, meaning he earned a share of every single unit sold. Over 100 million grills have been sold worldwide, generating, by some estimates, over $200 million for the former boxer. The grill became more than an appliance. It became a cultural icon, a staple in college dorms and first apartments, a symbol of simple, healthier eating. George Foreman's name became more associated with the grill than with his boxing career for an entire generation. He had performed the ultimate magic trick. He'd taken a simple kitchen gadget and, through the sheer force of his infectious and unlikely personality, punched it straight into the American consciousness, creating a legacy far more enduring than any championship belt. Of course, while George Foreman turned a grill into a household name through pure personality, other celebrity endorsements from the same era achieved memorability through a completely different and far more baffling strategy. They weren't selling a personality, they were selling a painfully specific, almost scientific claim. To understand this peculiar moment in advertising history, we have to travel back to the 1970s, a time of polyester, pet rocks, and some truly earnest, low-key commercials. This brings us to the curious case of actress and tennis star Kathy Lee Crosby and her passionate endorsement of Wesson oil. For those who might not recognize the name, Kathy Lee Crosby was a recognizable face in the 70s and early 80s. She was a skilled amateur tennis player who transitioned into acting, landing roles in television shows and even famously portraying Wonder Woman in a 1974 TV movie before Linda Carter made the role iconic. She had an all-American, girl-next-door quality, wholesome, trustworthy, and athletic. So when the makers of Wesson oil, a popular vegetable-based cooking oil, went looking for a spokesperson, she seemed like a perfect fit. She wasn't a chef, she was an everyday person who cooked, which made her seem more relatable to the average homemaker tuning in. But the content of the commercials was where things got truly strange. The entire campaign hinged on one incredibly specific, almost mundane technical claim. Kathy Lee would be shown in a simple kitchen set, often dressed in a tennis outfit to subtly remind you of her athletic credentials, and she would deliver her lines with unwavering sincerity. Her mission: to inform the American public that Wesson oil was unique because it soaks in less. That was the entire hook. She would hold up two pieces of fried food, say, a piece of chicken fried in a competitor's oil and one fried in Wesson, and authoritatively point out that the Wesson fried piece was noticeably less greasy. The slogan became an earworm: Wessonality, it soaks in less. They even created a cartoon mascot, a cheerful little droplet named Wessonality, who would bounce around the screen to drive the point home. In hindsight, the entire campaign is a surreal artifact from a bygone era. There was no dramatic flair, no over-the-top comedy, no attempt to make the product seem glamorous or exciting. The value proposition was purely functional. Our oil is slightly less absorbent than the other guy's oil. It was advertising as a bland science lesson. And yet, it worked. The campaign ran for years and became deeply ingrained in the cultural memory of anyone who watched television during that time. Its success lay in its straightforward, almost clinical promise. In an era before health-conscious eating was a major trend, the idea of less grease was a tangible benefit. Kathy Lee Crosby's calm, credible delivery made the claim feel like an indisputable fact. She wasn't a hyperactive game show host, she was a knowledgeable authority figure giving you a useful tip. It was a campaign that could only have flourished before the irony-drenched, spectacle-driven advertising of today. It was absurd not because it was wacky, but because it was so profoundly unwacky, proving that sometimes the most bizarre choice a celebrity can make is to be completely, utterly, and earnestly normal. Moving from the calm, scientific authority of Kathy Lee Crosby to the sheer, unadulterated bombast of the 1980s, we find a commercial campaign that took a completely opposite approach. If Wesson Oil was a quiet lecture, our next endorsement was a full-blown, high-volume intervention. This was the era of excess, of big hair, bigger shoulder pads, and the biggest personalities television could contain. And few personalities were bigger or more intensely committed to their character than Mr. T, after skyrocketing to fame as the fearsome yet lovable Mechanic B. A Baracus on the hit show The A-Team, Mr. T became a national icon. His image, the mohawk, the gold chains, the relentless scowl was instantly recognizable. He didn't just play a tough guy, he was the tough guy. So when the Mars Candy Company needed a way to market their Snickers bar to a generation hungry for attitude, they didn't just hire an actor, they unleashed a force of nature. The concept was brilliantly simple and perfectly captured the spirit of the decade. The commercials would open on a scene of everyday failure, a pianist hitting a wrong note during a concert, a construction worker fumbling a load of bricks, a painter accidentally splattering his canvas. In the midst of this incompetence, a voice would boom from off-screen, dripping with pure, unfiltered contempt. "You're a disgrace," it would thunder. The camera would then cut to Mr. T, glaring with an intensity usually reserved for interrogating enemy agents. Dressed in his signature outfit, he would launch into a gloriously over-the-top tirade, diagnosing the problem not as a lack of skill, but as a simple case of hunger. "You need some nuts, you need Snickers." The sheer absurdity of the premise was its power. Mr. T wasn't just suggesting a snack, he was performing a public service by verbally assaulting people until they consumed a candy bar. He was an anger management coach who prescribed chocolate, peanuts, and caramel. The dialogue was delivered with such unwavering conviction that it bypassed logic entirely and went straight for the funny bone. He'd point a jewel-encrusted finger and snarl lines like, "You play like that 'cause you're hungry," with the gravitas of a general assessing a battlefield failure. The solution was always the same. The hapless victim would eat a Snickers bar, their energy would be miraculously restored, and they would instantly become a master of their craft, all while Mr. T looked on with a grunt of approval that was the closest he ever came to a smile. This campaign was a masterpiece of character-based marketing. They weren't selling the taste of Snickers or even its nutritional content, they were selling an idea. The idea that this candy bar was so powerful, so potent, that it could transform you from a weakling into a champion, and that only a tough love guru like Mr. T would have the guts to tell you the hard truth. It was intimidating, it was ridiculous, and it was utterly hilarious. It worked because Mr. T never broke character. He fully committed to the bit, treating a candy bar with the same seriousness he treated foiling international crime syndicates on television. For a generation of kids, Mr. T's Snickers commercials weren't just ads, they were must-see TV, tiny episodes of The A-Team where the mission was to cure hunger-induced clumsiness. It was a glorious, over-the-top spectacle that could only have happened in the 1980s, proving that sometimes the best way to sell something sweet is to have a very tough guy tell you that you need it. If you thought Mr. T prescribing candy bars was a tough sell, prepare yourself for an endorsement that didn't just break the mold, it vaporized it. We are traveling back to the peak of the 1970s, a time of cultural revolution and shifting identities, to witness a commercial moment so audacious that it left the entire nation staring at their television sets in stunned silence. This is the story of Broadway Joe Namath, the swaggering superstar quarterback, and his decision to become the face and legs of Butamist pantyhose. To understand the sheer impact of this ad, you first have to understand who Joe Namath was in that era. He wasn't just a football player, he was a full-blown rock star in cleats. Famous for guaranteeing and then delivering a victory for the New York Jets in Super Bowl III against the heavily favored Baltimore Colts, Namath was the epitome of cool. He was brash, confident, and famously photographed in a full-length fur coat. He had a legendary playboy persona, and his name was synonymous with rugged, masculine success. He was, in essence, the last person on Earth anyone would expect to see modeling women's hosiery, which is exactly why the ad agency and the Beautimist company chose him. They weren't looking for a logical fit, they were aiming for a cultural detonation. The commercial itself is a masterclass in surreal simplicity. Namath is shown relaxing in a luxurious, white-walled apartment dressed in a stylish suit. He looks directly into the camera with his famous charming smile and begins to speak. He talks about the importance of Beautimist pantyhose, how they're made to fit a woman's body and won't run. And then, with a delivery so casual it's jarring, he delivers the knockout line. And if Beautimist can make my legs look good, imagine what they'll do for yours. As he says this, the camera slowly pans down, revealing that under his impeccably tailored trousers, he is, in fact, wearing a pair of sheer, nude Beautimist pantyhose. He even casually crosses his legs, showcasing the product in all its glory. The audacity was breathtaking. This wasn't a wink-wink, nudge-nudge parody. Namath played it utterly straight, with a genuine and convincing sincerity. He was selling the quality and comfort of the product, and to prove his point, he had personally put them on. The public reaction was a mixture of shock, confusion, and for some, outright outrage. This was nearly 50 years ago, a time when gender roles in advertising were rigid and unquestioned. Men sold cars, tools, and beer. Women sold cosmetics, cleaning products, and yes, pantyhose. For a hyper-masculine icon like Namath to willingly cross that line was unprecedented. He was risking his entire carefully cultivated image for a product he clearly didn't need. Critics wondered if it was career suicide, but Broadway Joe, ever the confident showman, never flinched. He defended the commercial, stating simply that it was a great product and that he was getting paid a lot of money, a reported sum of $10,000 for the one-day shoot, which was a massive fee at the time. In hindsight, the campaign was decades ahead of its time. While it was certainly played for a shock value that would guarantee talk, it also subtly challenged the very idea of what a man could or should endorse. It was a brilliant, if bizarre, business move. The commercial became instantly legendary, talked about on every talk show and written about in every newspaper. The publicity for Beautimist was immeasurable. Namath's credibility wasn't harmed. If anything, his willingness to be in on the joke and his unshakable coolness only enhanced his reputation as a fearless nonconformist. He didn't become less of a man, he became more of a star, one who was confident enough in his own masculinity to wear pantyhose on national television and make you believe they were fantastic. It was a gamble that paid off in cultural capital, creating a 30-second spot that remains one of the most daring and memorably absurd celebrity endorsements of all time. But if Joe Namath's pantyhose ad was a calculated shock to the system, our next celebrity venture into the world of endorsement was a slow, steady, and incredibly successful burn that targeted a very specific and captive audience. We're leaving the football field and the surreal 70s behind and stepping onto the glossy, glamorous ranch of the Ewings. The 1980s were the golden age of the primetime soap opera, and few shows were bigger or more deliciously dramatic than Dallas. And at the center of it all was Victoria Principal as Pamela Barnes Ewing, the epitome of Texas elegance and beauty. For millions of viewers, she wasn't just an actress, she was a style icon, a woman who seemed to have it all, including flawless skin. And when she decided to leverage that image, she didn't just do a commercial, she built an empire on the back of the most powerful marketing tool of the era, the long-form infomercial. The concept was pure genius in its simplicity. Victoria Principal wasn't just selling a moisturizer, she was selling access. Her company, Principal's Secret, offered a complete skincare system, and she presented herself not as a distant celebrity, but as a trusted confidante. The infomercials were masterclasses in personal connection. They often featured Victoria in a soft-focus, intimate setting, looking directly into the camera and speaking with a calm, earnest authority. She would share her own personal skincare journey, talking about the stress of long hours under studio lights and her quest to find products that truly work. This wasn't a hard sell, it was a heartfelt recommendation from a friend who happened to be a famous beauty. The name itself, Principal's Secret, was a brilliant piece of marketing. It implied that this was Victoria's own personal, hidden knowledge, a beauty secret she had guarded closely and was now generously sharing with her fans. The scientific claims, however, often ventured into dubious territory. The products were touted with buzzwords like bioactive, scientific breakthrough, and dermatologist tested, but the explanations were vague, relying more on the glamour of the founder than on concrete, peer-reviewed data. It was a classic example of "because I said so" science, where the celebrity's authority replaced actual evidence. The infomercials would showcase dramatic before and after shots and glowing testimonials from everyday women, all carefully crafted to create an aura of undeniable results. This direct-to-consumer model was perfectly tailored to its daytime television audience. For women at home, these half-hour programs felt more like an informative talk show than a commercial. Victoria Principal came across as knowledgeable, sincere, and deeply invested in the product that bore her name. She wasn't a hired spokesperson, she was the founder, the face, and the heart of the brand. This authenticity, whether entirely genuine or expertly performed, was incredibly effective. Principal's Secret wasn't just another jar of cream on a drugstore shelf. It was a premium, exclusive system endorsed by a beloved television star, and it was available with a simple phone call. The venture was a monumental success, reportedly generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and making Victoria Principal one of the wealthiest actresses in Hollywood at the time. It cemented a new blueprint for celebrity entrepreneurship, proving that a famous face could be the most powerful ingredient in any product. The legacy of Principal's Secret is a fascinating chapter in the history of advertising. It demonstrated the immense power of perceived intimacy and trust, showing that an audience captivated by a character on their television screen was more than willing to follow that character's advice off-screen as well, even if the actual science behind the secret remained, well, largely a secret. But if Victoria Principal's infomercials were a masterclass in controlled, intimate persuasion, our next endorsement is a legendary tale of a campaign that spun completely out of control, becoming famous not for its sales pitch, but for its spectacular, almost tragic failure to deliver one. We are stepping out of the glossy 80s and into a much more classical, yet profoundly awkward realm of advertising. This is the story of Orson Welles, the genius director of Citizen Kane, a man with one of the most commanding and resonant voices in the history of cinema, and his deeply unfortunate partnership with Paul Masson Wines. By the late 1970s, Welles' career as a Hollywood wonderkind was decades behind him. He was a larger-than-life figure, known as much for his immense talent as for his difficult reputation and his struggles to get projects financed. He took on voiceover work and commercials to fund his own films, and in 1978 he signed a $1 million contract with the Paul Masson Vineyards. The concept, on paper, was sheer brilliance. Paul Masson was a California winery that wanted to project an image of old-world elegance, tradition, and uncompromising quality. Who better to embody that than Orson Welles? His voice was like aged bourbon poured over gravel, authoritative, sophisticated, and dripping with gravitas. He wasn't just a celebrity, he was an institution. The plan was to have him serve as the company's emblem of taste, intoning the now famous slogan, "We will sell no wine before its time." The problem was, the time was never right for Orson Welles. The legendary stories from the set of these commercials have become the stuff of Hollywood lore. Welles, a perfectionist who despised the very idea of shilling for a product, was reportedly difficult and contemptuous of the process. He was famously unable to remember the simple lines, struggling with the teleprompter despite his decades of experience. Multiple takes were ruined because he would ad-lib, mumble, or simply stop, expressing his dissatisfaction with the script. In one infamous outtake, after flubbing the line yet again, he can be heard grumbling in exasperation, "What is this time? What time? This is the dumbest slogan I have ever heard." The disconnect between the product and the pitchman was astronomical. Here was Orson Welles, a man who once revolutionized filmmaking, now sitting in a director's chair, often visibly larger and uncomfortable, in a fake European chateau setting, trying to muster sincerity for a mass-produced, mid-tier Californian champagne. He would deliver lines about the vineyard's dedication to quality with a Shakespearean intensity that the product simply could not support. His profound, world-weary demeanor suggested he was announcing the fall of an empire, not the availability of a sparkling wine for $20 a bottle. The resulting commercials are a surreal viewing experience. Welles looks directly into the camera, his face a mask of solemnity, but his eyes often seem to be searching for an escape route. The gravitas is there, but it feels borrowed, misplaced. It's as if King Lear had been hired to do a car commercial. The campaign became a runaway success, but not for the reasons the advertisers intended. It was a success because it was so utterly bizarre, and because Welles' clear disdain for the entire endeavor was palpable through the screen. He wasn't selling wine, he was enduring it. The commercials and their leaked outtakes turned Orson Welles' Paul Masson era into a poignant and hilarious cautionary tale about the dangers of hiring a genius for a mundane task. It remains one of the most unintentionally funny and absurdly tragic endorsements in history, a perfect collision of high art and low commerce, where the only thing that wasn't ready was Orson Welles himself. Now, if Orson Welles represented a tragic collision of high art and low commerce, our next example showcases a figure who existed on an entirely different plane of advertising reality, one where volume, energy, and sheer, unapologetic enthusiasm were the only currencies that mattered. This is the story of a man who didn't just sell products. He performed a form of secular evangelism for household cleaners, a pitchman so loud, so passionate, and so utterly captivating that he became more famous than the items he hawked. We are talking, of course, about the one and only Billy Mays. Billy Mays didn't just arrive on your television screen, he invaded your living room. While other commercials might try to soothe you with soft music and gentle promises, Mays had a different strategy. He would appear with his trademark blue shirt, his bushy dark beard, and an expression of unbridled joy, and then he would simply unleash a torrent of pure, undiluted excitement. His voice was a booming, gritty baritone that didn't so much speak to you as it commanded your attention from the other side of the room, and his weapon of choice. OxyClean. The OxyClean pitch was a masterpiece of its genre. Billy Mays didn't just tell you the product worked, he performed a dramatic, almost miraculous demonstration right before your eyes. He would take a stained, grimy, seemingly ruined piece of fabric, a shirt sullied with red wine, a carpet attacked by motor oil, and he would unleash the power of his orange oxygen cleaner. He'd mix the powder with water, and the solution would immediately begin to fizz and foam with a violent, effervescent energy that looked less like chemistry and more like alchemy. "Hi, Billy Mays here," he'd bellow as if greeting an old friend at a rock concert. The stains wouldn't just fade, they would vanish, seemingly dissolving into nothingness under the sheer force of his will and the power of oxygenated cleaning agents. What set Mays apart from every other infomercial host was his authentic, palpable passion. He seemed to genuinely, profoundly believe that OxyClean was the greatest invention in human history. His pitch was a cascade of benefits delivered in a rapid-fire staccato that left no room for doubt or question. He wasn't selling a cleaner, he was offering a solution to life's little tragedies. He promised to restore what was lost, to reverse the irreversible, to bring order to the chaos of everyday spills and messes. His famous catchphrases like, "But wait, there's more," weren't just sales tactics, they were bursts of genuine excitement, as if he simply couldn't contain his joy at being able to offer you an even better deal. This wasn't mere advertising, it was a performance. Billy Mays understood the theater of the infomercial better than anyone. He was the star, the ringmaster, and the prophet of a brighter, cleaner future. His success was so immense that he transcended the late-night television slot and became a bona fide pop culture icon. He was parodied on Saturday Night Live, featured in talk show segments, and even co-starred in a reality show with fellow pitchman Anthony Sullivan. He became the undisputed king of the as seen on TV aisle, the face of an entire industry built on dramatic demonstrations and impossible promises. His legacy is a fascinating one. In an era where consumers are increasingly skeptical of advertising, Billy Mays' approach was refreshingly transparent. There was no subtlety, no pretense, no attempt to be cool or ironic. It was just a man, incredibly excited about a product, telling you exactly why you needed it in your life, at a volume that could shatter glass. He represented the peak of a certain kind of infomercial artistry, abrasive, relentless, and yet, somehow, incredibly effective and endearing. He turned the act of selling stain remover into a form of entertainment, proving that sometimes the most powerful tool in marketing isn't a whisper of suggestion, but a full-throated, joyous shout. While Billy Mays was mastering the art of the booming, high-energy pitch, another television icon was perfecting a different, yet equally effective form of salesmanship, one built on warmth, familiarity, and the irresistible promise of a quick and easy transformation. If the 80s were defined by Mr. T's aggressive prescriptions, the 90s ushered in an era of friendly, accessible solutions, and no product better encapsulates this shift than the iconic Thigh Master. And no one was better suited to sell it than Suzanne Somers, the bubbly, beloved star whose name became forever intertwined with a simple piece of spring-loaded plastic. To understand the sheer cultural power of this endorsement, you have to remember Suzanne Somers' place in the American psyche. For years, she was Chrissy Snow on the smash hit sitcom Three's Company, the adorable, slightly ditzy, and incredibly charming blonde who lived with two roommates and got into all sorts of hilarious misunderstandings. She was the girl next door, a figure of pure, unthreatening likability. After a very public and contentious contract dispute led to her departure from the show, she remained in the public eye, but her career needed a new chapter. She found it not in another sitcom, but in the burgeoning world of direct-response television, where her greatest character would become herself. The Thigh Master itself was almost comically simple. It was a glorified resistance band bent into a horseshoe shape covered in purple and blue foam. Its function was straightforward. You squeezed it between your thighs or arms to perform isometric exercises. It wasn't a revolutionary piece of fitness equipment. It was a basic tool that had existed in various forms for decades. But what it lacked in innovation, it more than made up for in its marketing genius. It wasn't sold as a grueling workout regimen. It was sold as a squeeze. The entire premise was built around the idea that you could achieve toned, sculpted legs without ever breaking a sweat, without leaving your living room, and without investing in expensive gym memberships or complicated machinery. And who better to deliver this promise than Suzanne Somers? Her commercials were masterpieces of friendly persuasion. She wouldn't yell, she would beam. Dressed in a leotard and leggings, often with a gorgeous backdrop behind her, she would demonstrate the product with an effervescent joy. She wasn't an intimidating fitness guru with chiseled abs. She was your friend Suzanne, showing you this nifty little secret she'd discovered. She'd laugh that familiar Chrissy Snow laugh and talk about how you could use the Thigh Master while watching TV, talking on the phone, or reading a book. The message was clear. Fitness had never been so easy, so convenient, or so fun. Her relentless, cheerful promotion on every talk show and in every magazine interview turned the Thigh Master into a genuine phenomenon. It wasn't just a fitness product, it was a pop culture icon, a staple in countless homes and the butt of countless jokes, but Summers was always in on the joke. She never took herself too seriously, which made her all the more credible and endearing. She understood the product was silly, but she genuinely believed in its benefits, and that authentic enthusiasm was infectious. The Thigh Master sold millions of units, not because it was a miracle device, but because Suze and Summers made millions of people believe that a better version of themselves was just a few easy, painless squeezes away. It symbolized a whole era of fitness, a pretense of effort that catered to our desire for quick fixes, all sold with a dazzling, trustworthy smile. While Billy Mays and Suzanne Summers perfected the art of the solo sales pitch, proving that a single magnetic personality could move millions of units, another campaign from the same era achieved something entirely different and in many ways far more subtle. This endorsement didn't rely on loud demonstrations or the promise of a quick fix. Instead, it sold a feeling, an idealized snapshot of life itself. To see it, we have to rewind to the late 1970s and early 80s, a time when capturing a memory meant a trip to the drugstore to develop a roll of film and a days-long wait to see if your pictures turned out. Into this world of delayed gratification stepped Polaroid with its miraculous promise of an instant photograph. And to sell that magic, they didn't hire one celebrity, they hired two, crafting one of the most believably charming duos in advertising history, James Garner and Mariette Hartley. Garner and Hartley were both accomplished, well-respected actors, but they weren't known as a pair. James Garner was the quintessential American leading man, famous for his roguish charm in shows like The Rockford Files, embodying a kind of relaxed, witty masculinity. Mariette Hartley was a versatile actress with a sharp, intelligent presence and a wonderfully expressive face. When brought together for Polaroid, the chemistry was not just instant, it was electric. The concept for the commercials was deceptively simple. They weren't playing characters with names, they were playing themselves, a sophisticated, loving, and highly amusing couple who just happened to use their Polaroid camera to navigate the small, humorous moments of their relationship. The genius of these spots was in their writing and execution. They were structured like miniature sitcom episodes, each 30-second spot featuring a self-contained conflict that was always resolved with a wink and the click of a Polaroid camera. The dialogue was snappy, witty, and felt genuinely ad-libbed. In one classic spot, the couple is bickering playfully about whether a man they see is bald. James insists he is, Mariette insists he isn't. The solution? They use the zoom lens on their new Polaroid Supercolor camera to settle the bet, snapping a picture for undeniable evidence. The camera wasn't just a device, it was the third character in their relationship, the playful mediator that provided proof and provoked laughter. Another layer to the campaign's success was its aspirational quality. Garner and Hartley portrayed a version of married life that was both attainable and enchanting. They were attractive and lived in a beautiful home, but their humor was grounded and relatable. They teased each other, they laughed with each other, and they always seemed to be genuinely enjoying one another's company. The Polaroid camera was seamlessly woven into this idyllic life, not as a piece of technology, but as an enabler of connection and joy. It was the tool they used to play, to remember, and to love. You didn't just want the camera, you wanted the kind of easy, witty, and affectionate relationship that it seemed to facilitate. The campaign's most bizarre and telling side effect was the widespread public belief that James Garner and Mariette Hartley were actually married in real life. The chemistry was so potent, the performances so natural and effortless that audiences refused to accept it was just acting. This was a testament to their incredible skill. They sold the fantasy so completely that the line between advertisement and reality completely blurred. Polaroid wasn't selling the technical specifications of their cameras, though they were certainly demonstrated. They were selling a lifestyle package: love, laughter, proof, and instant gratification, all wrapped up in the appealing personas of two stars who seemed to be having the time of their lives. It was a campaign that felt less like being sold to and more like being let in on a wonderful inside joke between two very charming friends. But if the Polaroid campaign with Garner and Hartley represented advertising at its most sophisticated and aspirational, the very same era also gave birth to its polar opposite, a form of marketing so brilliantly simple, so utterly shameless in its desire to move product that it bypassed artistry entirely and went straight for the cultural jugular. The 1970s were a golden age for the catchphrase. Television shows, especially sitcoms, were factories of memorable one-liners that would be repeated in schoolyards and workplaces across the country the very next day. And few catchphrases ever exploded with the raw, energetic force of Jimmy Walker's signature exclamation from the hit CBS show Good Times, "Din-O-Mite." Walker played James Evans Jr., better known as Jay, the eldest son in a working-class African-American family struggling to make ends meet in a Chicago housing project. The show itself often dealt with serious social issues, but Jay was the comic relief, an aspiring painter with a mile-wide smile and an endless supply of swagger. His exclamation of "Din-O-Mite" was his verbal signature, an all-purpose expression of excitement, approval, and amazement that he delivered with a unique, explosive physicality. His eyes would go wide, his body would tense up, and he'd practically shout it to the rafters. It was impossible to ignore and incredibly infectious. Almost overnight, it became a national sensation, the yeet or the let's go of its day, plastered on t-shirts, echoed by kids everywhere, and cementing Jimmy Walker's place in the pop culture firmament. This kind of heat attracts a very specific type of businessman, and none were more opportunistic than the masters of late-night television advertising at K-Tel International. K-Tel was a marketing behemoth famous for its compilation albums that promised 20 original hits by 20 original stars. They were the purveyors of Hooked on Classics, Super Bad, and Blockbuster, albums that collected recent pop, disco, and soul hits onto a single, conveniently priced LP or 8-track tape. Their commercials were a frenetic art form unto themselves, a rapid-fire montage of song clips accompanied by a hyperactive voiceover announcer who would enthusiastically list every single track, often ending with the irresistible call to action. But wait. Order now and you'll also get another entire album or a set of steak knives, all for one low price. They understood the power of branding, and in the mid-1970s, they saw in Jimmy Walker's catchphrase not a piece of dialogue but a brand unto itself. So they did what any savvy, slightly cynical marketer would do. They licensed it. The result was the 1975 compilation album Din-O-Mite, a collection of contemporary funk and soul hits that had absolutely nothing to do with the television show Good Times or the character of Jay Walker. The tenuous connection was the vibe. The songs were energetic, danceable, and well, Din-O-Mite. The album cover was a masterpiece of this cynical brilliance. It featured a massive, cartoonish explosion erupting behind the bold, brightly colored letters of the title. And there, floating in the corner, was a photo of Jimmy Walker, his face frozen in mid-exclamation, as if he himself had just detonated the dynamite. His involvement began and ended with licensing his image and his famous word. He didn't curate the tracklist, he didn't host the album, and he certainly didn't perform on it. He was a human trademark, and K-Tel had just slapped that trademark onto a product to see if it would sell, and sell it did. The campaign was a perfect storm of cultural timing and marketing audacity. For a kid who loved Jay Walker, here was a way to own a piece of that excitement. For a parent, it was an easy birthday gift that connected with their child's latest obsession. The commercial, of course, leaned all the way in. That familiar, frantic K-Tel announcer would run through hits like Average White Band's Pick Up the Pieces and KC and the Sunshine Band's Get Down Tonight. But the real star was the frequent, jarring insertion of Jimmy Walker himself shouting, "Din O Might." Over the music, a sonic brand stamp that reminded you why you were supposedly buying this particular compilation instead of any other. This endorsement was absurd not because it failed, but because it was so transparently, gloriously mercenary. It was the logical endpoint of fame, the reduction of a person's entire creative output into a single, marketable soundbite that could be sold to move units of a completely unrelated product. It wasn't about Jimmy Walker's musical taste or his connection to the artists. It was about the synaptic connection in a consumer's brain between a feeling of joy and a shouted word. K-Tel understood that in the swirling marketplace of the 70s, a powerful enough catchphrase wasn't just a piece of language, it was its own form of currency, and they were more than happy to spend it. But while Jimmy Walker's endorsement was pure, explosive fun, another campaign from the same era took a far more serious and, in many ways, far more calculated approach. It understood that the most powerful form of persuasion isn't a shouted catchphrase, but a quiet, authoritative recommendation from someone you trust implicitly. To see this strategy in action, we must step into the calm, sterile, and reassuring world of television medicine and examine one of the most successful and ethically murky celebrity endorsements of all time. This is the story of Robert Young, the beloved actor who played Dr. Marcus Welby, and how he used that character's immense credibility to sell America on the health benefits of Sanka decaffeinated coffee. In the early 1970s, Robert Young wasn't just an actor, he was a national symbol of trust and compassion. For 7 seasons, from 1969 to 1976, he starred in the enormously popular ABC drama Marcus Welby, M.D. He played a kind, wise, and endlessly patient family doctor who made house calls and always took the time to solve his patients' most puzzling medical mysteries. The show was a ratings juggernaut, and Robert Young's performance was so convincing, so utterly devoid of the actor's ego, that a vast portion of the American public had a difficult time separating the man from the character. In their minds, Robert Young was a doctor. He spoke with the calm authority of one, he offered diagnoses with the certainty of one, and he inspired the same level of confidence as a real medical professional. This blurring of lines between fiction and reality presented a golden opportunity for the makers of Sanka. Here was a product, a decaffeinated coffee, that was being marketed not on its taste but on a health claim. Its entire value proposition was that by removing most of the caffeine, it alleviated the nervous tension and stress associated with regular coffee. This was a medical claim, and who better to deliver it than America's most trusted television physician? The advertising agency crafted a campaign that leaned entirely into this perceived authority. The commercials were stark, simple, and designed to look and feel like a public service announcement. Robert Young wouldn't be presented as an actor, he would be presented as an expert. In these spots, Young would appear, often dressed in a suit and tie that subtly evoked a doctor's professional attire rather than a white coat. He would look directly into the camera, his expression one of sober concern. He spoke in the same measured, paternal tones he used on Marcus Welby, M.D., discussing the perils of caffeine-induced anxiety and sleeplessness as if they were serious medical conditions he treated every day. The script was careful, using language that implied medical endorsement without making explicit, legally actionable claims. He wouldn't say, "Sanka is good for you." He would say, with an air of profound wisdom, "If you're concerned about caffeine, perhaps you should consider Sanka." He was a doctor making a suggestion, not a salesman making a pitch. The most famous and effective tagline of the campaign was a masterstroke of this implied authority, Sanka. All the coffee you love, without the caffeine you don't, doctor recommended, and everyone knew exactly which doctor they were talking about. The campaign was a monumental success, dramatically boosting Sanka's sales and solidifying its position as the leading brand in the decaf market. It worked because it tapped into a deep-seated psychological principle, the halo effect. The admirable qualities of the character Marcus Welby, his wisdom, his trustworthiness, his compassion were effortlessly transferred to the product he was endorsing. If Dr. Welby said Sanka was a better choice, then it must be true. Yet this success came with a significant ethical shadow. The campaign deliberately exploited the confusion between an actor and the character he portrayed. The Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission eventually took notice, and the Robert Young Sanka campaign became a central case study in new guidelines governing celebrity endorsements. Regulations were strengthened to require clearer disclosures, ensuring that audiences understood they were watching a paid advertisement featuring an actor, not receiving free medical advice from a real doctor. Robert Young's Sanka commercials remain a fascinating and deeply influential chapter in advertising history. They demonstrated the immense power of borrowed credibility and paved the way for the modern era of influencer marketing, all while serving as a permanent cautionary tale about the fine line between persuasive advertising and deliberate deception. If the campaign featuring Robert Young showed the power of borrowed authority, the next endorsement on our list represents the absolute pinnacle of star power, a deal so colossal it reshaped the entire landscape of celebrity marketing. We are moving from the quiet, trusted living room of Marcus Welby to the global, pyrotechnic stage of the biggest pop star the world has ever known. This is the story of Michael Jackson and Pepsi, a partnership forged not just in boardrooms but in literal flames. By 1983, Michael Jackson was not merely a musician, he was a cultural force of nature. His album, Thriller, was demolishing every sales record in existence, and his influence stretched to every corner of the globe. He was the king of pop, a figure of immense mystery and magnetic appeal. For a brand like Pepsi, which had been locked in the cola wars with Coca-Cola for decades, Michael Jackson represented the ultimate weapon. They didn't just want him to sing a jingle, they wanted to own a piece of that magic. The result was a $5 million contract, an astronomical, unprecedented sum for a celebrity endorsement at the time that made Jackson the official face of Pepsi. This wasn't a sponsorship, it was a coronation. The hype machine for the campaign was unlike anything ever seen. The commercials, directed by big-name Hollywood talent, were treated as major media events. The first ad, set to a reworked version of Jackson's hit Billie Jean, renamed You're the Pepsi Generation, was a spectacle of choreography and style, featuring a younger, groundbreaking Michael at the absolute peak of his powers. He wasn't just holding a can of soda, he was an icon, and the soda was simply lucky to be in his presence. The campaign was a monumental success, driving sales and brand recognition to incredible new heights. It perfectly captured the feeling that by drinking a Pepsi, you weren't just having a cola, you were tapping into the cool, the innovative, the revolutionary spirit of Michael Jackson himself. But this fusion of brand and superstar came with an immense and nearly catastrophic risk. The danger of tying your entire identity to a single, mercurial, and intensely private individual was demonstrated in the most terrifying way possible during the shoot for a follow-up commercial at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles in 1984. The concept involved Jackson descending a staircase amid a shower of sparks and fireworks, a dramatic entrance fit for a king. But during one take, a pyrotechnic effect misfired, launching a magnesium flash bomb that landed directly in Jackson's famously permed hair. The synthetic fibers ignited instantly, engulfing his head in flames. For a few horrifying seconds, as he continued dancing to the music pumping through his headphones, Jackson didn't even realize he was on fire. It was only when his brother Jermaine noticed the smoke and screamed that the crew rushed in, with stunt coordinator Bob Johnson famously tackling Jackson and smothering the flames with his leather jacket. The pop star suffered second- and third-degree burns on his scalp, an injury that caused him immense physical pain and by many accounts triggered a lifelong dependency on prescription painkillers. The incident was a surreal and tragic metaphor for the entire enterprise, the incredible white-hot heat of fame that both propelled Michael Jackson and ultimately consumed him. In the absurd theater of celebrity endorsements, the Pepsi deal stands as a landmark of both breathtaking ambition and sobering consequence. It proved that a brand could, for a time, harness the power of a true global icon to achieve unimaginable success. But it also served as a stark warning about the volatility of such a partnership. The same intense, almost otherworldly star power that could sell millions of soda cans was also unpredictable and carried with it a potential for disaster, both for the individual and the brand that hitched its wagon to them. The image of Michael Jackson, the ultimate performer, being literally burned by the machinery of his own spectacle remains one of the most enduring and chilling moments in advertising history, a permanent reminder that when you play with the brightest fire, you risk getting burned. If the Michael Jackson Pepsi incident was a tragic accident born from spectacle, our next endorsement is a masterclass in a very different kind of disaster, one born not from pyrotechnic malfunction, but from a stunning, almost breathtaking level of celebrity tone deafness. This story takes us to the glamorous, often superficial world of late 1980s Hollywood, a time of excess and ambition, where an actress at the peak of her fame decided to openly confess her insincerity to the entire nation for a paycheck. This is the cautionary tale of Sybil Shepherd and the Beef Industry Council, a campaign that lasted mere moments on air but whose repercussions echoed for years, becoming the gold standard for endorsement catastrophes. By 1987, Sybil Shepherd was a certified star. She had risen to fame as a model and then an actress in films like The Last Picture Show and Taxi Driver, but it was her role as the sophisticated, witty Maddie Hayes on the hit television series Moonlighting opposite Bruce Willis that made her a household name. Maddie was stylish, intelligent, and effortlessly chic, a character millions of women admired and aspired to be like. Shepherd herself was seen as the embodiment of that glamour and sophistication. She was, in the eyes of advertisers, the perfect vessel to deliver a message of quality and taste. The American Beef Industry Council saw in her a way to combat growing health concerns about red meat and reposition it as a fashionable, healthy choice for the modern, discerning woman. The concept for the commercial was simple enough. In a series of print ads and a television spot, Shepherd would be depicted in elegant settings, enjoying a delicious beef dish. The tagline was "Beef, real food for real people." The intention was to leverage her upscale image to make beef seem not just wholesome, but also chic and desirable. The shoot proceeded without incident. Shepherd said her lines, smiled for the camera, and collected her reported $1.5 million fee. Then, in what can only be described as an act of monumental self-sabotage, she went on a press tour and decided to be candid. In an appearance on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, she was asked about the endorsement. With a breezy, offhanded laugh, she revealed the shocking truth behind the glamorous ads. She confessed that she didn't actually eat red meat herself. In fact, she openly stated that she avoided it, and then she delivered the line that would instantly vaporize her credibility and ignite a firestorm. She said she had done the commercial, and I quote, "for the money." The silence in the studio was likely deafening, followed by a wave of nervous laughter from the audience who couldn't quite believe what they had just heard. It was a moment of such raw, unvarnished honesty that it completely bypassed scandal and entered the realm of legendary gaffe. She had not only admitted to the core hypocrisy of celebrity endorsements that the famous face doesn't necessarily use the product, but she had done so with a casual flippancy that insulted both the advertiser and the consumer. She was essentially telling the entire beef-eating American public that she thought they were foolish enough to believe her acted performance, and that she was savvy enough to take their money while holding herself above the product she was selling. The backlash was immediate, brutal, and widespread. The Beef Industry Council was understandably apoplectic. They had paid a fortune to have their product associated with her elegance, only to have her publicly declare it beneath her. They pulled the commercials almost instantly, but the damage was done. Cattle ranchers and beef producers across the heartland were furious, seeing her comments as an arrogant slap in the face from a coastal elite who looked down on their livelihood. The public felt duped and disrespected. Talk shows and newspaper columnists had a field day, using her quote as the ultimate example of Hollywood hypocrisy. For Sybil Shepherd's career, the impact was significant and lasting. While she didn't vanish entirely, the beef incident became a permanent stain on her reputation, a punchline that followed her for years. It shattered the carefully crafted image of Maddie Hayes, replacing it with a perception of her as cynical, out of touch, and unprofessional. It was a textbook lesson in the unwritten rules of celebrity endorsements. The audience is willing to suspend their disbelief, but they are not willing to be openly mocked. The contract isn't just for your face, it's for your perceived integrity. By admitting it was all a transaction, she broke the magical illusion that makes the entire business work. Her confession remains one of the most starkly honest and professionally costly moments in advertising history, a permanent warning to any famous person tempted to bite the hand that feeds them, especially when that hand is holding a very well-done steak. Just as Sybil Shepherd's beef endorsement revealed the perils of celebrity insincerity, another campaign from the same era proved that the most dangerous and controversial endorsements often come from a place of utter, unblinking conviction. This brings us to one of the most infamous and boundary-shattering moments in advertising history, a campaign that didn't just sell jeans, it ignited a firestorm of debate about childhood, sexuality, and the very nature of selling itself. In 1980, a 15-year-old Brooke Shields, already a veteran model and actress, stared into a camera and delivered a line so provocative, so dripping with innuendo, that it would instantly cement her in the cultural consciousness and define an entire decade's fraught relationship with desire and marketing. The campaign was for Calvin Klein jeans, and the line was, "You want to know what comes between me and my Calvins? Nothing." To understand the sheer impact of this moment, you first have to appreciate the landscape. The late 1970s and early 80s were a period of massive cultural shift. The conservative values of the post-war era were colliding with a new, bold, and often brazen sensibility emerging from the worlds of fashion and entertainment. Calvin Klein, the designer, was at the forefront of this change. He wasn't just selling clothing, he was selling an attitude, a lifestyle of cool, minimalist sophistication that was often edged with a hint of provocation. He understood that to break through the noise, advertising couldn't just showcase a product, it had to create a sensation, and with Brooke Shields, he found his perfect instrument. Brooke Shields was a unique phenomenon. She had been a model since infancy and had already caused a stir with her role in the film Pretty Baby, where she played a child prostitute in New Orleans at the turn of the century. She possessed a seemingly contradictory quality, the face of an innocent, angelic child and the knowing, world-weary gaze of a woman far beyond her years. This duality was the catalyst for the entire campaign. The now legendary television commercial and print ads were stark and intimate. They often featured Shields in tight, stone-washed jeans posed against a plain background. The camera would linger on her, and she would speak directly to the viewer, her voice a low, confident purr that was utterly disarming coming from someone so young. The dialogue was minimal, but every word was loaded. In one ad, she asks, "Want to know what comes between me and my Calvins?" She pauses, allowing the implication to hang in the air for a moment before delivering the devastating punchline, "Nothing." The genius and the controversy lay in its brilliant ambiguity. On the most literal, innocent level, she could have been saying that the jeans fit so perfectly that there was no gap, no space between the denim and her skin. But in the context of her delivery, her age, and the charged atmosphere of the ads, the primary interpretation for nearly everyone was overtly sexual. She was implying she wore nothing underneath the jeans. It was a statement that was at once a boast about the jeans' perfect fit and a startling declaration of sexual availability from a minor. The public reaction was immediate and volcanic. Parent groups, religious organizations, and television networks were outraged. Many stations refused to air the commercial. Talk shows and news programs debated it endlessly. Critics accused Calvin Klein and the advertising agency of exploiting a child, of peddling a form of softcore pornography to sell pants. They argued that the campaign was morally reprehensible, blurring the lines between childhood innocence and adult sexuality in a deeply disturbing way. Brooke Shields' mother and manager, Terry Shields, became a central figure in the controversy, fiercely defending the campaign and her daughter's participation, arguing that it was artful and sophisticated, not pornographic. Despite the furor, or more likely because of it, the campaign was a staggering success. Calvin Klein jeans sales reportedly skyrocketed by an astonishing 300% in the first year. The ads didn't just make people talk, they made people buy. They tapped directly into the rebellious, desire-driven spirit of the youth market. For teenagers, the ads were cool, daring, and transgressive. Wearing Calvins wasn't just about fashion, it was about adopting a persona of confident, rebellious sexuality. The campaign forever changed the relationship between fashion advertising and controversy, proving that shock value, when expertly calibrated, could be converted directly into massive commercial success. It demonstrated that an ad could function as a cultural event, generating millions of dollars worth of free media coverage through the sheer force of the debate it provoked. The legacy of the Brooke Shields Calvin Klein campaign is complex and enduring. It launched her into a new stratosphere of fame, forever typecasting her as this enigmatic, provocative figure. For Calvin Klein, it established a blueprint for provocative marketing that the brand would continue to use for decades. But more importantly, it forced a national conversation that we are still having today about the sexualization of young people in media, the ethics of advertising, and the powerful, often uncomfortable intersection of commerce and desire. It remains a landmark moment, a perfect and unsettling snapshot of a time when a pair of jeans and a single, whispered line could captivate and scandalize an entire nation. If the Brooke Shields campaign traded on provocative ambiguity, the next mega endorsement on our list was a spectacle of pure, unadulterated, corporate-approved glee. Just as the new millennium dawned, a new pop princess ascended the throne, and her reign was powered by sugar, caffeine, and an advertising budget of epic proportions. This was the era of Britney Spears and Pepsi, a partnership so massive, so meticulously engineered, and so perfectly symbolic of its time that it felt less like a marketing campaign and more like a national event. After the missteps and controversies of previous decades, Pepsi had perfected the art of the pop star endorsement, and in a teenaged Britney, they found not just a spokesperson, but the living, dancing embodiment of the Pepsi generation. By the year 2000, Britney Spears was a global supernova. Her debut single, Baby One More Time, had exploded onto the airwaves, and she was the undisputed queen of a new wave of teen pop. She represented a very specific, highly marketable kind of energy. She was bubbly, incredibly talented, and possessed a wholesome sex appeal that was palatable to teenagers and their parents alike. For Pepsi, she was the ideal vessel. She was the antithesis of the edgy, controversial figures of the past. She was safe, she was positive, and she was everywhere. The goal was no longer to be provocative. It was to be omnipresent, to own the very airwaves of popular culture. The commercials themselves were mini blockbusters, directed by major filmmakers and boasting production values that rivaled music videos. The most iconic of these was set in a futuristic gladiatorial arena. The ad opens on a coliseum packed with cheering fans, all dressed in Pepsi blue. Britney, wearing a stylish silvery outfit, is ushered into the center of the arena not as a prisoner but as a champion. Her challenge isn't to fight for her life, but to choose her refreshment. She's presented with a can of the main competitor, Coca-Cola, which she promptly discards with a dismissive flick of the wrist. Then, a can of Pepsi is rolled in like a treasured artifact. She picks it up, opens it with that satisfying hiss, and as she takes a sip, the entire arena erupts in cheers. The message was unmistakable. Britney's choice wasn't just a preference, it was a coronation, and the entire world was celebrating her impeccable taste. This campaign represented the absolute peak of corporate pop convergence. It was a perfect closed loop of marketing. Britney's songs played on the radio, her videos aired on MTV, and her face sold the soda that sponsored it all. You couldn't escape it. Her image was on countless cans and bottles, in store displays, and in magazine ads. The commercials premiered during the Super Bowl, the most expensive advertising real estate on the planet. The deal, reportedly worth $7 to $8 million, made her the highest-paid Pepsi spokesperson since Michael Jackson. But unlike Jackson's enigmatic cool, Britney's appeal was her relatable, girl-next-door quality, even as she was performing in a giant arena. She made drinking a Pepsi feel like an essential part of being young, fun, and incredibly cool. Yet, for all its glossy perfection, the Britney Pepsi era also carried a subtle, underlying commentary. This was the ultimate appropriation of youth culture by a corporate giant. Pepsi wasn't just aligning itself with a trendy star, it was attempting to become the culture itself. The Gladiator commercial, in particular, is a fascinating artifact. It frames consumer choice as a heroic act of defiance, a moment of individual triumph against a faceless opponent. But of course, the choice is an illusion. It's a scripted moment in a multi-million-dollar ad. The rebellion is entirely manufactured, the celebration preordained. Britney wasn't a rebel, she was the impeccably managed face of a global corporation, and her rebellion was simply choosing $1 billion brand over another. It was spectacle without substance, but my goodness, was it ever a dazzling spectacle. For a brief, shining moment at the turn of the millennium, Pepsi didn't just have a spokesperson. They had a willing, smiling avatar for a new generation of consumption, proving that the most powerful endorsements aren't just about selling a product, they're about selling an entire identity, one irresistible sip at a time. And from the world of fizzy pop superstardom, we descend into a far more serious, and some might say sobering, realm of television advertising, the shadowy world of financial fear and golden promises. If Britney Spears was selling a sugar rush of optimism, our next celebrity endorsement trades on a very different currency, anxiety. This takes us to the cable news landscape of the late 2000s, a time of economic turmoil and widespread uncertainty, where a familiar face from prime-time drama found a lucrative second act by offering a seemingly solid, timeless solution. For viewers flipping between news channels, there was one commercial that became as constant as the doom and gloom market reports themselves, featuring the gravelly, authoritative voice of William Devane, assuring a nervous nation that the answer to all their financial fears was as simple as buying gold. William Devane was no stranger to American living rooms. For years, he played the charming, sometimes ruthless, political fixer Gregory Sumner on the long-running nighttime soap opera Knots Landing. With his distinguished silver hair, piercing eyes, and a voice that sounded like it had been aged in oak barrels and filtered through gravel, he exuded an aura of intelligence, power, and insider knowledge. He wasn't just an actor, he played a man who knew how the world really worked, a man who pulled the levers of power from behind the scenes. This carefully crafted television persona was pure gold for a company called Rossland Capital, a precious metals dealer looking for the perfect spokesman to lend credibility to their operation. They didn't need a hyperactive infomercial host, they needed a sober, trusted statesman, and in William Devane, they found their ideal oracle of economic doom. The Rossland Capital commercials are a masterclass in a very specific, fear-based marketing genre. They are almost always set in a dark, serious, library-like room, filled with the warm glow of what appears to be a single desk lamp. Devane is dressed impeccably in a dark suit, sitting behind a desk, often holding a gold coin between his fingers, examining it with the solemn reverence of a scholar studying a sacred text. He doesn't shout, he speaks in a low, confidential, almost conspiratorial tone, as if he's letting you in on a secret that the big banks and the government don't want you to know. The script is a relentless drumbeat of dire warnings: runaway inflation, a collapsing dollar, volatile stock markets, and global instability. The message is clear: the entire financial system is a house of cards, and the only safe haven, the only real money, is the tangible, ancient security of physical gold and silver. Devane's performance is the key ingredient that transforms this sales pitch from a simple ad into a compelling, almost hypnotic piece of persuasion. He delivers every apocalyptic line with unwavering, grim-faced sincerity. When he leans into the camera and says the company's tagline, "For a free investor's guide, call the number on your screen," it doesn't sound like a sales call to action. It sounds like a life raft being thrown to a drowning man. He is the calm, reassuring captain on the bridge of a ship he's telling you is sinking, calmly directing you to the lifeboats that Rossland Capital just happens to be selling. He leverages the trust he built as a television authority figure to make these alarming claims feel not like salesmanship, but like privileged, expert advice from a man who sees the coming storm. The brilliance, and some would say the cynicism, of this campaign lies in its perfect timing and its exploitation of a very real public mood. These ads exploded during and after the financial crisis of 2008, a period when millions of Americans genuinely lost faith in traditional financial institutions. The fear was real, and Rossland Capital, through the vessel of William Devane, offered a simple, ancient, and emotionally satisfying solution. It's a classic example of a celebrity endorsement working on a deeply psychological level. We aren't just buying gold, we are buying the confidence and stability that William Devane's persona represents. We are trusting the man from television to guide us through the chaos, proving that sometimes the most effective endorsements aren't about selling joy or excitement, but about selling safety, security, and the comforting illusion of control in a world that feels increasingly out of it. From the calculated fear of financial markets, we pivot to a different kind of cultural whiplash, one born not from economic anxiety but from a jarring clash of aesthetics. The mid-2000s were a fascinating time for celebrity fashion lines. Stars were no longer just wearing clothes, they were creating them, and the marketplace was flooded with collections that promised a piece of a coveted lifestyle. And few lifestyles were more coveted, more obsessively photographed and dissected than that of Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen. By 2005, the former child stars had meticulously and brilliantly reinvented themselves. They had long shed their shared identity as Michelle Tanner on Full House, transforming into the undisputed high priestesses of a very specific and very expensive bohemian glamour. Their personal style was a masterclass in studied nonchalance. They were constantly photographed in oversized sunglasses, layers of luxurious draping fabrics, vintage fur coats, and artfully slouched beanies. They carried Birkin bags worth more than most cars and seemed to float through New York City in a hazy cloud of art, coffee, and impeccable taste. They weren't just wearing clothes, they were curating a mystique. This carefully crafted image was the foundation of their high-end fashion label, The Row, which they launched with quiet ambition, focusing on exquisitely made, minimalist luxury essentials with staggering price tags. They were the epitome of aspirational, exclusive cool. And then, with a move that left the entire fashion world blinking in confusion, they signed a deal to design a clothing line for Walmart. The announcement was nothing short of surreal. Walmart, the colossal big-box retailer, is the absolute antithesis of everything the Olsens had come to represent. It is the temple of mass consumption, of everyday low prices, of fluorescent lighting and shopping cart cacophony. The idea that the very women who were synonymous with $2,000 cashmere sweaters would now be designing $15 flannel shirts for the aisles of America's largest discount chain was a cognitive disconnect of epic proportions. It felt like a bizarre glitch in the matrix of celebrity branding. The line called Mary Kate and Ashley, Real Fashion for Real Lives, was promoted with ads featuring the sisters, though they appeared distant, almost holographic, as if their luxurious essence was being beamed into a supercenter from a loft in Soho. The collection itself was a strange, watered-down interpretation of their signature look. There were bohemian prints, tiered skirts, and peasant blouses, but rendered in the thin, synthetic fabrics and straightforward cuts required by Walmart's ruthless cost-cutting supply chain. It was boho chic for the masses, but it lacked the very soul of boho chic, which is an implied individuality and artisanal quality that simply cannot be produced at a scale of millions. For the Olsens' dedicated fans, the people who pored over paparazzi photos to decode their layered outfits, the line was an inexplicable betrayal. How could their style icons, their arbiters of taste, possibly endorse a retailer known for its plastic bins and gallon jugs of pickles? For Walmart shoppers who weren't following high fashion, the connection was likely just as confusing. Why were these two tiny, serious-looking women famous, and why were they selling clothes here? The venture was widely panned by critics as a cynical, cash-grab misstep that severely damaged the Olsen brand's hard-won credibility. It was the ultimate example of a celebrity endorsement ignoring the fundamental rule of brand alignment. The magic of a successful endorsement lies in a believable transfer of values from the star to the product. We could believe Michael Jordan's underwear was comfortable because he demanded excellence. We could believe George Foreman's grill was effective because he was a champion. But no one could believe that the Olsen twins, the queens of exclusive downtown cool, would ever actually set foot in a Walmart, let alone find inspiration there. The collaboration didn't make Walmart seem more fashionable. It made the Olsens seem wildly out of touch with their own image. The line was quietly discontinued after a few seasons, a rare and glaring fumble in their otherwise flawless business empire. It remains a classic case study in what happens when a brand and a celebrity inhabit such vastly different universes that not even a 9-figure contract can build a believable bridge between them. While William Devane sold financial security through grim warnings, and the Olsen twins created a confusing bridge between high fashion and big box retail, another television star from the same era achieved infomercial immortality by doing the one thing he did best, being an invincible, unstoppable force of nature. This brings us to the tale of a man whose very name became an internet-era synonym for ultimate power, a martial artist and action star whose second act wasn't just a successful endorsement, it was the complete and total absorption of a product into his own legendary persona. We are talking, of course, about Carlos Ray Norris, better known to the world as Chuck Norris, and his decades-long partnership with the Total Gym. By the mid-1990s, Chuck Norris was already a bona fide icon. He was the star of the long-running television series Walker, Texas Ranger, a man who could defeat entire gangs of criminals with a single roundhouse kick and a stern look of disapproval. His film career was built on a foundation of stoic, indestructible heroes who spoke softly and hit very, very hard. He was the epitome of old-school, no-nonsense toughness. So, when the creators of the Total Gym, a home fitness system that uses your own body weight for resistance, went looking for a spokesperson, they didn't just want a famous face, they wanted a symbol of strength. And in Chuck Norris, they found a figure who wasn't just strong, he was mythic. The genius of the campaign was its utter simplicity and its perfect alignment of product and personality. The Total Gym itself is a clever but straightforward piece of equipment, a padded glide board that moves along rails at an incline, allowing for a wide variety of exercises. It's not a rack of intimidating iron weights, it's an efficient, practical machine. The commercials, however, weren't really about the machine's mechanics. They were about Chuck Norris. He wouldn't scream or sweat profusely like other fitness gurus. Instead, he would perform each movement on the total gym with a calm, controlled, and almost effortless precision. His expression rarely changed. While demonstrating a chest press or a leg curl, he looked less like a man working out and more like a Zen master demonstrating the fundamental principles of the universe. The narration, often provided by his friend and fellow martial artist Christy Brinkley, would explain the benefits, but the real sell was visual. You weren't just watching a man use an exercise machine, you were watching Chuck Norris approve of it. The unspoken message was devastatingly effective. If this machine is capable of helping Chuck Norris maintain his peak physical condition, then it is certainly powerful enough for you. He lent the product an aura of undeniable credibility. This wasn't a fad, this was a tool used by a master. The campaign's longevity was astounding, running for over 20 years and making the total gym one of the most recognizable pieces of fitness equipment in the world. But the true, bizarre, and most enduring success of this partnership came not from the infomercials themselves, but from their unintended second life in the burgeoning culture of the internet. In the early 2000s, a phenomenon known as Chuck Norris facts began to spread like wildfire across forums and early social media. These were hyperbolic, absurd statements attributing impossible feats of strength and defiance of physics to Norris himself. Chuck Norris doesn't sleep, he waits. Chuck Norris can divide by zero. Chuck Norris once roundhouse kicked someone so hard that his foot broke the speed of light, time traveled, and killed Amelia Earhart while she was flying over the Pacific Ocean. And of course, there was the quintessential fact that perfectly encapsulated his total gym campaign. Chuck Norris doesn't exercise, he allows the earth to revolve around him for a cardio workout. This meme didn't just make people laugh, it completely reframed the endorsement. The total gym was no longer just a piece of fitness equipment Chuck Norris used. In the public imagination, it became the one earthly apparatus humble enough to be granted the privilege of being used by him. The infomercials, which were already successful, were now viewed through a lens of loving irony and deep appreciation. They were no longer just ads, they were canonical texts in the religion of Chuck Norris. This organic, internet-born mythology didn't harm the campaign. It launched it into the stratosphere, introducing Chuck Norris and his chosen gym to an entirely new, younger generation who might never have seen Walker, Texas Ranger. It was a rare and beautiful alchemy where paid advertising and free, fan-generated content fused together to create a legacy far greater than the sum of its parts. The Chuck Norris Total Gym campaign stands as a testament to the power of a perfectly matched celebrity and product, and a hilarious reminder that when your spokesperson's public image is that he can count to infinity twice, you've probably chosen the right guy. But if Chuck Norris proved that an endorsement could be amplified by the unpredictable forces of internet culture, our next example is a stark reminder of a very different kind of viral moment, one that isn't about manufactured myths, but about a completely unscripted, gloriously human blunder. We travel now to the year 2005, a time of low-rise jeans, trucker hats, and a reality television boom that was turning celebrities' personal lives into public spectacle. Into this world stepped Jessica Simpson, a pop star and reality TV darling whose every move was documented on the hit MTV show Newlyweds, Nick and Jessica. She was famous for her powerful singing voice and her equally powerful and often endearingly ditzy persona. And it was this very persona that Pizza Hut decided to leverage for the launch of their newest menu item, the Buffalo Chicken Pizza. The resulting commercial is less remembered for the product itself and more for a single, baffling line of dialogue that instantly cemented its place in advertising infamy. The setup was simple. The commercial, which also served as a segment on her reality show, featured Jessica and her then-husband, Nick Lachey, sitting at a kitchen table. A Pizza Hut delivery arrives and they dig into the new buffalo chicken pizza. As Jessica takes a bite, she chews thoughtfully, her face a canvas of genuine contemplation. Then she turns to Nick, her eyes wide with sincere, unadulterated confusion, and asks the question that would echo through the decades: is this chicken or is this fish? The delivery is perfect. There is not a hint of irony or performance in her voice. It is the pure, unvarnished query of someone whose brain has short-circuited in the face of a new flavor profile. Nick's reaction, a mix of disbelief, amusement, and affectionate exasperation, is the cherry on top. "It's chicken," he replies, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a very sweet, very confused child. It's called buffalo chicken. The immediate aftermath was a media firestorm. The line became an instant national punchline, replayed on talk shows, analyzed on news programs, and repeated in school cafeterias across the country. Critics and late-night hosts pounced, using it as definitive proof of Simpson's supposed lack of intelligence. It was a soundbite that seemed to confirm every dumb blonde stereotype in the book. For Pizza Hut, the reaction was likely a mixture of panic and bewildered excitement. On one hand, their spokesperson had just publicly expressed confusion about the core ingredient of the product she was being paid to promote. On the other, absolutely everyone was talking about it, and that is where the bizarre genius of this moment lies. In the cluttered landscape of advertising, where most commercials are forgotten seconds after they air, the buffalo chicken incident achieved the impossible. It became unforgettable. The sheer, stunning lack of media training, the raw, unfiltered humanity of the question, made it real in a way no slick, focus-grouped ad could ever be. People weren't just watching a commercial, they were witnessing a genuine, hilarious, and strangely relatable moment of brain fog. It was so absurd it looped back around to being brilliant. While other brands might have fired their spokesperson for such a gaffe, Pizza Hut arguably got more value out of that one confused question than from a dozen perfectly executed campaigns. The ad wasn't just selling pizza, it was selling a conversation piece. For a brief, shining moment, the entire country was asking the same question, and whether they were laughing at Jessica or with her, they were all saying the name of the product, buffalo chicken pizza. It was a masterclass in earned media, proving that in the world of endorsements, sometimes the biggest mistake can accidentally be the most memorable success. Speaking of unforgettable physical comedy and a total disregard for personal dignity, we now arrive at an endorsement that turned pain into pure comedic gold, transforming a simple pain relief cream into a must-see spectacle. In the world of athletic endorsements, it's standard practice to see superstars promote high-tech sneakers, sports drinks, or premium athletic wear. But what happens when one of the most dominant, physically imposing figures in sports history decides to champion a product designed for common aches and pains, and does so by subjecting himself to televised torture? This is the glorious, absurd saga of Shaquille O'Neal and Icy Hot. By the early 2000s, Shaquille O'Neal wasn't just a basketball player, he was a cultural titan. Standing 7 feet 1 inch tall and weighing over 300 pounds, he was a force of nature on the court, a 4-time NBA champion known for his sheer power and dominant presence. But off the court, he had carefully cultivated a second persona, that of a gentle giant with a goofy, infectious sense of humor. He was a rapper, an actor, and a beloved pitchman who wasn't afraid to laugh at himself. This unique combination of immense physicality and willing silliness made him the perfect candidate for one of the most physically committed ad campaigns ever conceived. The concept for the Icy Hot commercials was brutally simple, and Shaq embraced it with the fervor of a method actor. The spots would typically open on the big man in a locker room or gym, lamenting the deep, muscular pain that comes from a life of athletic exertion. He'd talk about the punishing nature of the game, the soreness in his knees and back, and then he would introduce the solution, icy hot, but this wasn't a dignified demonstration. This was a full-blown theatrical performance of agony and ecstasy. Shaq would take a massive handful of the cream and slather it over his massive shoulders or back with a grimace of intense concentration. And then the reaction would hit. The camera would zoom in on his face as the two-stage sensation of the product took effect. First, the icy, cooling menthol sensation, which he would initially welcome with a sigh of relief. But that was merely the calm before the storm. Seconds later, the hot, heating element would kick in, and Shaq's face would contort into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and pain. He wasn't just acting, he was performing a symphony of discomfort. He'd let out a guttural, pained scream that seemed to shake the very foundations of the set, his eyes widening to comic proportions. It was a transformation from serene giant to howling victim in the span of a few seconds, and it was utterly hilarious. The genius of these commercials lay in their perfect balance of relatability and absurdity. Every viewer who had ever used a liniment for a sore muscle understood the bizarre, intense sensation of hot and cold therapy. Shaq's exaggerated reaction was a magnification of that universal feeling, pushed to its logical and comedic extreme. But the absurdity came from the sheer scale of the star involved. This wasn't some unknown actor. This was Shaquille O'Neal, a living legend worth hundreds of millions of dollars, voluntarily subjecting himself to what appeared to be excruciating pain on national television for a product that cost a few dollars at the local drugstore. The dissonance was the joke. He was treating his championship-hardened body with the same cream your dad uses after a weekend of yard work. Shaq's total commitment to the bit is what sold it. He never winked at the camera or played it for irony. He fully invested in the performance, screaming and flailing with a conviction that would make a Shakespearean actor proud. He turned a mundane product demonstration into a masterclass of physical comedy. The commercials were so successful and so deeply embedded in the culture that they spawned a series of sequels, each one finding new and inventive ways for Shaq to suffer for our amusement. In one memorable iteration, he even gets zapped by a fictional icy hot-themed superhero version of himself, a meta twist that proved the campaign was just as in on the joke as the audience was. The partnership became one of the most enduring and beloved in advertising, not because it made icy hot seem like a miracle cure, but because it made Shaquille O'Neal seem like the world's biggest, strongest, and most hilarious goofball, a guy who, despite his fame and fortune, wasn't above a little public self-flagellation to sell some cream. But if Shaq's icy hot ads were a masterclass in self-aware physical comedy, our next endorsement plunges us into a far darker and more ethically fraught chapter of celebrity influence. The late 2000s and early 2010s marked the dawn of the social media age, a new frontier where fame could be monetized directly, with fewer gatekeepers and even less accountability. Into this void stepped a new kind of celebrity, one built not on traditional talent but on the curated spectacle of their own personal lives. And no one mastered this new game earlier or more effectively than Kim Kardashian. By 2011, she had parlayed a reality show and a keen understanding of publicity into a burgeoning empire. Her name was synonymous with a specific, glamorous, and intensely scrutinized lifestyle, and her every product recommendation carried immense weight with her millions of young, impressionable followers. It was this powerful, seemingly effortless influence that a company called QuickTrim was all too eager to buy. QuickTrim was part of a booming industry of dietary supplements that promised rapid, dramatic weight loss with minimal effort. Their products were a cocktail of stimulants, laxatives, and diuretics, packaged with bold claims about melting fat and boosting metabolism. In the unregulated Wild West of the supplement market, these products could make virtually any promise they wanted, often hiding behind a tiny disclaimer that their statements had not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. They didn't need to prove their products worked, they just needed to make people believe they did. And what better way to build belief than to partner with Kim Kardashian and her sisters, Khloe and Kourtney, whose bodies were constantly dissected and discussed in the media. The Kardashians represented a very specific beauty ideal, and their endorsement implied that quick trim was the secret weapon behind their figures. The advertising campaign was a classic of the genre. In commercials and social media posts, the sisters would speak directly to the camera, their delivery often feeling scripted and unnatural. They would talk about their busy lifestyles and the challenge of staying in shape, positioning quick trim not as a drastic measure, but as a helpful, natural boost to their healthy routines. "I use quick trim to get my body in shape and to keep it there," Kim said in one ad, while Khloe claimed the products helped her get that extra kick for her workouts. The message was carefully crafted to feel aspirational yet attainable. If these women, with their personal trainers and chefs, needed a little extra help from a bottle, then surely the average person did too. The campaign was relentless, leveraging the family's massive social media reach to create an echo chamber of promotion. For a time, it was incredibly lucrative. Quick trim sales soared, reportedly generating tens of millions of dollars. The Kardashians were likely paid a fortune, their going rate for such endorsements rumored to be in the high 6 or even 7 figures. But the facade began to crumble as the real-world effects of these supplements became apparent. Consumers reported adverse reactions like jitters, heart palpitations, severe cramping, and other side effects consistent with high doses of stimulants. More importantly, the central promised significant weight loss simply didn't materialize for the vast majority of people. The products were, at best, ineffective and, at worst, potentially dangerous. The ethical murkiness of the entire enterprise soon attracted the attention of regulators. In 2012, the company behind Quick Trim was hit with a major class action lawsuit alleging false advertising and deceptive business practices. But the real turning point came in 2015 when the Federal Trade Commission stepped in. The FTC filed complaints against the Kardashians and other celebrities for endorsing Quick Trim without disclosing that they were being paid, a direct violation of truth in advertising laws. The FTC's position was clear: when you have a financial connection to a company, that connection must be clearly and conspicuously disclosed. Phrases like #SP or #ad buried in a long string of hashtags were not enough. The Kardashians eventually settled, agreeing to pay fines and promised to clearly disclose their paid partnerships in the future. The Quick Trim chapter stands as a stark cautionary tale for the social media age. It exposed the profound ethical vacuum that can exist when immense influence meets a largely unregulated industry. The Kardashians, whether willfully ignorant or simply negligent, had used their platforms to promote a product with no proven efficacy and potential health risks to an audience that trusted them. The episode highlighted a painful disconnect: the glamorous, paid spokesperson versus the reality of the consumer who might experience harmful side effects for zero results. It wasn't just a bad endorsement, it was a breach of trust that helped usher in a new era of scrutiny and regulation for influencer marketing, proving that a famous name could be used not just to sell a dream, but to sell a potentially dangerous illusion. And so we arrive at what is perhaps the most dramatic and chilling fall from grace in the entire history of celebrity endorsements, a story that began as the ultimate American fairy tale and ended in a nightmare that shattered a brand's identity. This is the saga of Jared Fogle and Subway, a partnership built on a foundation of hope and transformation that concealed a horrifying reality, serving as the definitive warning about the dangers of hitching your entire reputation to a single, unvetted human being. Our story begins not on a soundstage but on a college campus in the late 1990s. Jared Fogle was an Indiana University student who tipped the scales at over 400 pounds. His weight was a source of immense struggle, affecting his health and his daily life. Desperate for a change, he devised his own drastic diet, which he later dubbed the Subway diet. The rules were simple, and to him they were a lifeline. For lunch, he would eat a 6-inch turkey sub. For dinner, a 12-inch veggie sub, and that was it. No breakfast, no snacks, no deviations. Over the course of a year, he claims this regimen, combined with a lot of walking, helped him lose a staggering 245 pounds. It was an incredible personal achievement, a testament to sheer willpower. This remarkable transformation might have remained a private victory if not for a piece in the Indiana Daily Student newspaper, which caught the eye of a young advertising executive. They saw something powerful in Jared's story, something raw, authentic, and incredibly relatable. This wasn't a movie star or an athlete. This was an everyday person who had achieved something extraordinary with a product available on every street corner in America. Subway at the time was looking to pivot its image away from just being a cheap lunch option and toward being a part of a healthy lifestyle. Jared was their miracle. The campaign they built around him was marketing genius. The commercials were straightforward and powerful. They often opened with a shocking before picture of a morbidly obese Jared, then cut to the new, slimmed-down version holding up his pair of enormous old jeans. His delivery was folksy and earnest. He'd tell his story with a shy smile, holding a Subway sandwich, and deliver the simple, unforgettable tagline, "I lost 245 pounds just by eating Subway." It was the perfect feel-good narrative. He wasn't just selling sandwiches, he was selling possibility. He was living proof that change was within reach, that you could take control of your life, and that a better version of yourself was just a foot-long away. The public adored him. He became Subway Jared, a folk hero for the health-conscious era. He toured schools to talk about fighting obesity, wrote a book, and became utterly inseparable from the brand. For Subway, the results were astronomical. Sales soared, and the campaign is widely credited with helping the chain surpass McDonald's in total number of locations in the United States. Jared wasn't a spokesperson, he was the heart and soul of their identity. But behind this carefully constructed image of wholesome perseverance, a very different and monstrous reality was taking shape. The first cracks in the facade appeared not with Jared directly, but with his close associate, the executive director of his Jared Foundation charity. In 2015, that man was arrested on charges related to child pornography. The investigation into his activities quickly and horrifyingly expanded to Jared Fogle himself. The details that emerged were gut-wrenching. Federal investigators uncovered that Fogle had not only solicited minors for sex, but had also received and collected child sexual abuse material. The man who had built a public persona on inspiring children to be healthy was in fact a predator who targeted them. The fall was swift and total. Subway immediately severed all ties, scrubbing his image from their websites and restaurants overnight. The public felt a collective sense of betrayal and revulsion. The feel-good story had been a lie, and the wholesome spokesman was a criminal. Fogle pleaded guilty to his crimes and was sentenced to over 15 years in federal prison. The impact on Subway was catastrophic. The brand had spent over 15 years making Jared's transformation the central pillar of its marketing. His face, his story, his very identity were synonymous with their promise of healthy living. When that pillar crumbled, it left a void that the chain has struggled to fill ever since. They weren't just dealing with a spokesperson scandal, they were dealing with the complete annihilation of their brand's narrative. The Jared Fogle case is the ultimate cautionary tale, a masterclass in the perils of putting all your faith in a single celebrity story without truly knowing the person behind the PR. Subway saw the perfect narrative and never looked beyond it. They never deeply vetted the man they were making the face of their company because the story was too good to question. In the end, the campaign's success was also its undoing. The more iconic Jared became, the more devastating his downfall would be. It's a stark reminder that in the world of endorsements, the most valuable asset isn't a compelling story, it's unshakable character, and that is something no amount of market testing can ever truly guarantee. While the Jared Fogle scandal represented a catastrophic betrayal of trust, our next endorsement takes us in a completely different direction, one built on absolute transparent authenticity, even if that authenticity was itself a carefully constructed persona. In the world of celebrity shilling, it's rare to find a partnership where the star doesn't just use the product, but where the product is a direct, tangible extension of the very character that made them famous. This brings us to the stoner comedy icon Tommy Chong and his brilliantly meta venture into the world of commercial glassware, a move that didn't just sell a product, it sold a lifestyle, an inside joke, and a piece of the counterculture itself. To understand the sheer genius of Tommy Chong's foray into the bong business, you first have to appreciate the character he spent decades perfecting. Alongside his partner Cheech Marin, Chong was one half of the legendary comedy duo Cheech and Chong, whose albums and films in the 1970s and 80s defined the stoner comedy genre. Chong's persona was that of the gentle, perpetually befuddled, deep-voiced hippie, a man who viewed the world through a haze of cannabis smoke and found profound, mellow wisdom in the simplest of things. He wasn't just playing a character. For a massive audience, he was that character. He was the high priest of hang loose philosophy, and his congregation was enormous. So when he decided to put his name on a line of smoking accessories, starting with the iconic Nice Dreams bong, a reference to the 1981 Cheech and Chong film of the same name, it wasn't a sellout. It was the most logical brand extension in the world. This was the ultimate meta endorsement. Tommy Chong wasn't pretending to like the product existed because of Tommy Chong. He was selling the literal tools of his own fictional trade. For fans, buying a Chong bong or a piece of his branded glassware wasn't just a purchase, it was an act of affiliation. It was a way to own a piece of the comedy, to signal your membership in a laid-back counterculture club that celebrated a very specific kind of recreation. The business venture, however, came with a unique and very real risk, one that ultimately moved the story from the comedy club to the courtroom. For years, Chong's company, Chong Glass, operated in a legal gray area. They sold products that were openly marketed for use with tobacco and legal herbs, but everyone from the company to the customer understood their intended purpose. This wink and nudge approach worked until it didn't. In 2003, as part of a larger federal crackdown on drug paraphernalia known as Operation Pipe Dreams, Tommy Chong was arrested. The government's case specifically targeted his business, arguing that by selling these products, he was knowingly promoting illegal drug use. In a shocking turn of events, the comedian known for his peaceful, mellow demeanor was facing serious federal charges. Chong ultimately pleaded guilty to a single count of distributing drug paraphernalia and was sentenced to 9 months in federal prison. The case was widely criticized as a wasteful overreach, a bizarre use of government resources to prosecute a 70-year-old comedian for selling water pipes. For his fans, it transformed Chong from a mere comedian into a counterculture martyr, a man who had literally done time for the lifestyle he joked about. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. The character he played was being punished by the very straight-laced authority that the character always mocked. Upon his release, the entire ordeal only served to burnish his credibility and strengthen his brand. He emerged not broken, but with a new cause, becoming an advocate for the decriminalization and legalization of cannabis. His business, now operating in a rapidly changing legal landscape, found a new lease on life. What was once a clandestine inside joke was now a legitimate enterprise in a burgeoning industry. Tommy Chong's brand of glassware and cannabis products became a symbol of a culture coming out of the shadows, a testament to the idea that the once maligned stoner lifestyle was finally achieving mainstream acceptance. thanks in no small part to the pioneers who had always celebrated it. His endorsement worked because it was never an endorsement at all, it was a continuation of the bit, a lifetime of performance art that you could now actually purchase and use, a perfect blurring of the lines between comedian, character, and commerce. Yet if Tommy Chong's story is one of a persona merging with a product in a way that felt oddly authentic, our next endorsement stands as one of the most viscerally uncomfortable and ethically bankrupt chapters in the history of using fame to sell. We journey now to the mid-2000s, a period when the once bright lights of 80s child stardom had dimmed for many, leaving behind a landscape of financial desperation and faded glory. Into this bleak territory stepped a company called Cash Call, a predatory lending operation that saw not tragedy in these fallen stars but opportunity. And no partnership was more jarring, more nakedly exploitative than their commercials featuring Gary Coleman. For those who grew up with him, Gary Coleman was a phenomenon. As Arnold Jackson on the smash hit sitcom Different Strokes, he was the adorable, cheeky child with the impossibly deep voice and the iconic catchphrase, "What you talkin' 'bout, Willis?" He was one of the most famous faces on the planet, a symbol of innocent, wisecracking charm. But the story behind the scenes was a classic Hollywood tragedy. Mismanagement of his substantial earnings, legal battles with his parents and advisors, and serious health issues had left him financially ruined and struggling to find work by the 2000s. His was a name synonymous with a very public and painful downfall. Cash Call and the advertising agency they hired saw this vulnerability not as a reason for compassion, but as the perfect marketing angle. The concept for the commercials was brutal in its simplicity. They would take Coleman's most famous line, the cheerful, "What you talkin' 'bout, Willis?" and twist it into something cynical and cruel. In the ads, Coleman is shown in a sparse, coldly lit office setting. He is no longer the cute kid. He is a weary, older man, but the script forces him to tap into a hollow echo of his former persona. He looks directly into the camera, his expression a strained mask, and delivers his new, corporately mandated catchphrase, "What's your excuse?" The implication is staggering in its audacity. He is literally asking viewers, many of whom were likely struggling financially themselves, why they haven't yet taken out one of Cash Call's notoriously dangerous loans. The ads then cut to a series of actors portraying various stereotypes of financial irresponsibility: a man buying an expensive latte, a woman getting a manicure, while a smug, disembodied voiceover lists their supposed excuses. The entire production is designed to shame and pressure the viewer. Gary Coleman, a man whose own life was a testament to the financial predation of the entertainment industry, had been transformed into the mocking face of a different kind of predator. The loans he was hawking came with annual percentage rates that could soar into the triple digits, trapping borrowers in a devastating cycle of debt from which escape was nearly impossible. The dissonance was horrifying. Here was a victim of exploitation, paid to exploit others. Watching these commercials today is a deeply unsettling experience. There is no joy in Coleman's performance, no spark of the actor he once was. He looks tired, resigned, and utterly disconnected from the words he is being paid to say. The ads felt less like an endorsement and more like a public humiliation, a form of corporate-sponsored bullying where the bully himself was also a victim. It was a transaction that laid bare the absolute worst of celebrity culture, a company with a morally reprehensible product using a faded star's financial desperation to lend their operation a false and deeply sad veneer of familiarity and fun. The campaign was widely criticized as exploitative, but it ran for years because it was undeniably effective for the lender, tapping into a potent mix of nostalgia and shame. The Gary Coleman Cash Call chapter remains a dark benchmark, a reminder that when the cameras stop rolling and the money runs out, for some, the most famous catchphrase in the world can be bought and twisted into a question that preys on the very people who once cheered for you. After the unsettling spectacle of Gary Coleman's cash call ads, we find a welcome and comforting palate cleanser in the form of one of television's most beloved maternal figures. In the chaotic landscape of celebrity endorsements, where shock value and absurdity often reigned supreme, there was one campaign that achieved incredible success by doing the exact opposite. It was a masterclass in stability, warmth, and trust, proving that sometimes the most powerful sell is the one that feels like a reassuring hug from mom. This brings us to the long-running, utterly wholesome partnership between Florence Henderson, America's favorite television mother, and Wesson Oil. To understand the potency of this endorsement, you have to first appreciate the cultural footprint of Carol Brady. For generations of Americans, the Brady Bunch wasn't just a sitcom. It was a 30-minute weekly lesson in idealized family life. And at the center of that sunny, shag-carpeted universe was Florence Henderson's Carol Brady. She was the calm, compassionate, and always perfectly coiffed matriarch who could solve any problem, from a squabble between step-siblings to a failed science project, with a gentle word and a knowing smile. She represented a specific kind of domestic bliss, a vision of motherhood that was capable, kind, and always in control of her kitchen. She wasn't just an actress, she was an archetype. It was this specific, powerful association that the makers of Wesson Oil sought to capture. While Kathy Lee Crosby had sold the product on a clinical, scientific claim years earlier, the campaign with Florence Henderson was built on something far more powerful: emotional resonance. The commercials, which ran throughout the 1970s and into the 80s, were exercises in pure, unvarnished sincerity. There were no wild costumes, no pyrotechnics, and no absurd premises. Instead, we would see Henderson in a simple, cheerful kitchen set, often wearing an apron, looking directly into the camera with her famously warm and trustworthy smile. Her delivery was the antithesis of a hard sell. She didn't shout about the product's features. She spoke to the viewer as if they were a friend she'd invited over for coffee. She'd be shown preparing a simple meal, frying chicken or tossing a salad, and she would explain in her calm, reassuring voice why she preferred Wesson Oil. The dialogue was never complicated. She would talk about its lightness, its all-purpose utility, and how it never left a greasy taste. The most famous tagline, "Remember, it's not a good salad unless it's made with Wesson," was delivered not as a command but as a friendly piece of advice from someone who genuinely wanted your family's dinner to be as perfect as the Brady's seemingly always was. The sheer brilliance of this campaign lay in its seamless alignment of product, personality, and perceived expertise. Florence Henderson wasn't just a famous person, she was America's mom. And what does mom know best? What to cook for her family and how to make it delicious. The endorsement felt completely natural because it was built on a foundation of believable authority. Of course, Carol Brady would have a preferred cooking oil. Of course, she would want to share that tip with you. There was no cognitive dissonance, no jarring clash between the celebrity's image and the product they were selling. It was a perfect match. This campaign ran for over a decade, not because it was edgy or unforgettable in a bizarre way, but because it was dependable like a favorite recipe. In a world of advertising that constantly screamed for attention, Florence Henderson's Wesson Oil commercials were a quiet, calming presence. They sold a feeling of security and domestic competence. Using Wesson Oil wasn't just a culinary choice. It was a small way to tap into that Brady Bunch ideal, to bring a little of that televised harmony into your own home. It remains a shining example of how a brand can leverage a celebrity's authentic persona to create an endorsement that feels less like an advertisement and more like a cherished piece of advice from a trusted friend. But if Florence Henderson taught us the power of trust earned through a beloved television role, our next story demonstrates how a very different kind of character can be leveraged to create a business empire built on a surprising foundation of genuine warmth. We are leaving the idyllic suburban kitchen of the Bradys and stepping into the gritty, sun-bleached streets of Los Angeles. into the world of a man whose face is more often associated with prison yards and back alley brawls than with gourmet cuisine. This is the unexpected, heartwarming, and wildly successful story of Danny Trejo and Trejo's Tacos. For decades, Danny Trejo wasn't just a working actor, he was the ultimate Hollywood heavy. With a weathered face etched with a distinctive tattoo, a muscular frame, and a piercing gaze, he built a career on playing convicts, cartel enforcers, and hardened criminals in films like Heat, Con Air, and Robert Rodriguez's Machete series. His on-screen persona was so potent because it was rooted in a very real, very difficult past. Trejo has been remarkably open about his life before acting, a youth spent in and out of California's most notorious prisons, battling addiction and living a life of violence. His turnaround, finding acting while working as a drug counselor on set, is the stuff of Hollywood legend. He wasn't just playing tough guys, he had lived the life, and that authenticity radiated from every frame. Which is why the idea of him opening a taco restaurant seemed, on its surface, like a bizarre punchline. But Trejo's Tacos, which opened in Los Angeles in 2016, was anything but a cynical cash-in. It was the culmination of a lifelong passion and a deeply personal mission. For Trejo, food wasn't just business, it was community, it was family, and it was redemption. He often tells the story of his grandmother's cooking, of how meals were a central, stabilizing force in a chaotic childhood. He saw his restaurant not as an extension of his movie roles, but as an extension of his true self, the Danny Trejo who overcame his demons and wanted to create a positive, welcoming space for his community. The brilliance of Trejo's Tacos lies in its masterful blending of his tough guy image with an atmosphere of startling inclusivity and joy. The branding is self-aware and playful. The logo features a cartoon version of Trejo's iconic face, complete with the trademark mustache and bandana, but he's smiling, holding a taco. The menu items carry names like the Machete Burrito and the Traffic Burrito, a witty nod to his filmography. You can order a plate of Cochinito's Little Pigs, a cheeky reference to his many roles as a villain. It's a concept that fully embraces the irony without ever descending into parody. You're not eating at a theme park, you're eating at a restaurant owned by Danny Trejo, and he's in on the joke. But the true secret to its explosive success goes far beyond a clever gimmick. The food is genuinely remarkably good. This isn't a celebrity slapping their name on a prefabricated concept. Trejo was deeply involved in crafting a menu that celebrates the authentic, vibrant flavors of LA's Mexican street food scene, but with a focus on high-quality, fresh, and accessible ingredients. There are vegan and vegetarian options that are celebrated just as much as the carne asada, reflecting the diverse fabric of the city itself. The restaurants themselves are bright, energetic, and family-friendly, the polar opposite of the dark, threatening environments he often inhabits on screen. This authenticity is the engine of the entire enterprise. When you see Danny Trejo himself, who is often at one of his locations, laughing with customers, taking photos, and genuinely seeming to love what he's built, the entire concept clicks into place. This isn't an endorsement, it's an embodiment. He successfully transferred the authenticity of his life story, the struggle, the survival, the hard-won joy directly into his brand. People aren't just buying a taco from a famous face, they're buying into a story of redemption, and they're supporting a local business owner who is a pillar of his community. Trejo's Tacos has since expanded to multiple locations, launched a successful cantina, and even published a best-selling cookbook. It stands as a powerful testament to the idea that the most successful endorsements aren't about borrowing fame, but about building a brand that is a true and honest reflection of the person behind it, proving that even the toughest exterior can hide the heart of a devoted restaurateur. While Danny Trejo built a new legacy from the ground up with authentic passion, another star from a different era discovered a far simpler, if less inspired, path to cashing in on faded fame. The 1980s were a golden age for the television sitcom, creating a factory of fresh-faced teen idols who beamed into living rooms weekly. But what happens when the hit show gets cancelled, the laugh track fades, and the public's attention moves on to the next big thing? For many, the answer lay in the burgeoning world of late-night infomercials, where nostalgia could be bottled and sold directly to a loyal and aging fan base. And few examples are more perfectly emblematic of this trend than Scott Baio and his cheerful, if entirely predictable, pitch for a Life vitamins. Scott Baio wasn't just a teen heartthrob, he was a cornerstone of two of the most beloved sitcoms of the era. First, he was the suave, leathered jacket-wearing ladies' man Chachai Arcola on the monolithic hit Happy Days. Then, he headlined his own spin-off, Joni Loves Chachai, before starring in the popular series Charles in Charge. For over a decade, his face was a fixture on television, representing a certain brand of all-American, slightly mischievous charm. But by the early 1990s, those shows were in reruns, and leading roles were harder to come by for an actor transitioning out of his boyish persona. The phone wasn't ringing as much for prime-time gigs, but it was definitely ringing for a different kind of opportunity, one that didn't require memorizing lines, just cashing checks. Enter a Life vitamins. The product itself was utterly unremarkable, one of countless brands of multivitamins lining pharmacy shelves. Its unique selling proposition wasn't a scientific breakthrough or a special formulation, it was Scott Baio. The infomercials were masterclasses in comfortable, low-stakes nostalgia. They often featured Baio in a cozy sweater, sitting in a tastefully decorated living room set, speaking directly to the camera with a relaxed, familiar smile. He wasn't playing a character, he was playing an idealized version of himself, the Scott Baio you remembered and trusted from your favorite shows, all grown up and here to offer some friendly health advice. The script was carefully crafted to feel like a conversation with an old friend. He'd talk about the challenges of getting older, the importance of staying healthy to keep up with a busy lifestyle, and how he'd found a simple solution in a life. There was no Billy May-style intensity, no Suzanne Summers-esque revolution, just a calm, reassuring recommendation. The genius and the cynicism of the campaign was its targeted appeal. It wasn't designed to win new, young customers. It was laser-focused on the viewers who had grown up with him, who were now in their 30s and 40s, starting to feel their own aches and pains and becoming more conscious of their health. They trusted Chachai, they trusted Charles, so why wouldn't they trust his choice in daily vitamins? The entire venture was a transaction built entirely on borrowed goodwill. There was no indication that Scott Baio had any particular expertise in nutrition or wellness. His qualification was his fame and the specific kind of affectionate familiarity that comes from years spent in someone's home as a television guest. He was selling the idea that taking these vitamins was akin to taking advice from an old, dependable friend. The commercials were successful because they were frictionless. They asked very little of the viewer, no dramatic lifestyle change, just swallowing a pill, and offered a sense of comfort and continuity. It was a business model perfected in the 80s and 90s. Mine the past to sell a future of better health, one bottle of utterly standard multivitamins at a time. It wasn't groundbreaking, it wasn't ethical lightning, but it was a brilliantly effective use of a celebrity's most valuable remaining asset, the warm, fuzzy glow of nostalgia. Yet even this bizarre foray into financial shame looks almost quaint compared to the sleek, pastel-colored, and meticulously filtered absurdity of the modern social media endorsement. We have now entered an era where the currency isn't just fame, but influence, a world where a family can build an empire on the perception of flawless perfection, and then sell the very tools they imply created it, regardless of whether those tools actually work. This brings us to the glittering, pastel-hued phenomenon of the Kardashian-Jenner clan and their promotion of Sugar Bear hair vitamins, a masterclass in using unparalleled social media clout to sell a modern-day snake oil wrapped in Instagrammable packaging. If the quick trim scandal was a lesson in the dangers of promoting dubious weight loss supplements, the Sugar Bear Hair chapter represents a more subtle yet equally cynical evolution. Gone are the overt, shaky health claims that attract regulatory scrutiny. In their place is a softer, more insidious form of persuasion, the aesthetic of wellness. Sugar Bear hair vitamins aren't sold as a medical treatment, they're sold as a lifestyle accessory. The product itself is a brilliant piece of marketing design. The vitamins are not pills but soft, chewy gummies in a distinctive baby blue color, shaped like adorable little bears. They arrive in a clear, plastic bottle that looks more like a trendy toy than a dietary supplement, a perfect prop for the carefully curated shelfies that dominate influencer feeds. This is healthcare reimagined for the generation that prioritizes how something looks on their vanity over what it actually does inside their body. And who better to sell this vision than the Kardashians and Jenners? By the mid-2010s, they were not just celebrities, they were walking, talking brands, each with tens of millions of followers on Instagram, a platform they treated as a direct-to-consumer sales channel. Their feeds were a non-stop parade of perfection, flawless skin, impossibly thick and shiny hair, and physiques that seemed to defy genetics. They created an aura of unattainable beauty, and then, for a price, they offered the keys to the kingdom. A post from Kim or Kylie featuring the iconic blue bottle wasn't just an ad, it was an implied secret. The message was never explicitly, "This will make your hair grow." It was always more suggestive, more aspirational. "I love these vitamins." Sugar Bear Hair #ad. The #ad, often buried in a long list of others, was the only concession to transparency, a tiny whisper of legality in a scream of promotion. The mechanism of the sell is what makes it so effective and so ethically fuzzy. When Khloe Kardashian holds up a bottle and talks about her hair journey, she's leveraging the trust of an audience that has watched her transform her appearance over years on television. They've seen her hair evolve, and they are primed to believe that these cute gummies played a role. The campaigns were, and still are, relentless. Every sister posted. Their friends posted. It created an echo chamber of endorsement that made the product feel like an inevitable, essential part of every beauty routine. For the price of around $30 for a one-month supply, consumers weren't just buying vitamins, they were buying a tiny piece of the Kardashian dream, a chance to participate in the same ritual as their idols. The problem, of course, lies in the stark reality behind the glittering facade. A close look at the ingredients reveals a formulation that is, at best, underwhelming. The key components are basic vitamins like biotin, folic acid, and vitamin D, nutrients that are undoubtedly important for overall health and can support hair health if you are deficient in them. However, these same nutrients are found in far higher concentrations in a standard, much cheaper multivitamin, or even more abundantly in a balanced diet rich in eggs, nuts, and leafy greens. Sugar Bear Hair's real innovation isn't nutritional, it's in branding and pricing. They took pennies worth of common vitamins, added blue food coloring and a sugary base, and sold them at a massive markup because they had a bear shape and a famous name on the bottle. The most damning criticism, however, comes from dermatologists and trichologists, the actual experts in hair and skin health. They consistently point out that for individuals without a specific vitamin deficiency, which is most of the population eating a standard diet, these supplements will have zero noticeable effect on hair growth or thickness. Any perceived benefits are often placebo effects, coincidental, or the result of other lifestyle changes. The entire enterprise is built on a clever exploitation of hope and insecurity, wrapped in a package so cute and promoted by people so famous that it bypasses our critical thinking. It is the absolute pinnacle of modern celebrity endorsement absurdity, using unimaginable fame to sell overpriced, underpowered gummy candy to millions of people. convincing them that the path to beauty is not through genetics, professional treatment, or a healthy diet, but through a monthly subscription to a jar of sugary blue bears. It proves that in the social media age, the most successful product isn't the one with the best science, but the one with the best marketing and the most influential friends. But if the sugar bear hair phenomenon represented the subtle power of social media influence, our next example demonstrates a seismic shift in the very nature of celebrity endorsement, moving from simply lending a famous face to actually building a product empire from the ground up. We are entering the world of high-fidelity audio, a realm traditionally dominated by obscure brands preaching technical specifications to a niche audience of audiophiles. Into this insular world walked a hip-hop legend with a vision that had very little to do with frequency response and everything to do with cultural cachet. This is the story of Dr. Dre and Beats by Dre, a masterstroke of marketing that transformed a pair of headphones from a listening device into the ultimate must-have status symbol, rewriting the rules of celebrity product creation in the process. To understand the sheer brilliance of the Beats launch, you first have to appreciate the landscape it entered. For decades, the headphone market was split into two camps. On one side, you had the inexpensive, flimsy earbuds that came free with your music player. On the other, you had the high-end, audiophile-grade headphones from companies like Sennheiser and Bulky, often beige-colored contraptions that promised pristine sound reproduction but were marketed with dry, technical jargon about drivers and impedance. They were designed for critical listening in a quiet room, not for making a statement on a crowded city street. There was a massive, gaping hole in the middle, a product that looked as cool as it sounded, a fashion accessory that also delivered a powerful auditory experience. Dr. Dre and his business partner, Interscope Records co-founder Jimmy Iovine, didn't just see that hole, they drove a monster truck through it. The foundation of the entire enterprise was Dr. Dre's unimpeachable credibility. This wasn't just any celebrity, this was Andre Young, the iconic producer behind albums like N.W.A.'s Straight Outta Compton and his own multi-platinum, The Chronic. He was an architect of the West Coast sound, revered for his meticulous, bass-heavy production style. His name wasn't just famous, it was synonymous with quality in music. When he put his name on a pair of headphones, the implication was earth-shattering. These were the tools he used in the studio. These were how the music was meant to be heard. This was the central, powerful illusion of the Beats campaign. The marketing suggested that by buying these headphones, you weren't just buying a consumer product, you were gaining access to Dr. Dre's expert ear. You were hearing the music through the same lens as its creator, but the credibility was only the launch pad. The real genius was in the marketing blitz that followed. Beats by Dre wasn't launched with a standard ad campaign. It was launched with a cultural takeover. The company leveraged Iovine's deep industry connections to pull off an unprecedented move. They gave away thousands of pairs of headphones to the biggest stars on the planet. Suddenly, you couldn't watch a music video, a sports event, or a red carpet show without seeing the distinctive, sleek design of the Beats headphones dangling around the necks of artists like Lady Gaga, LeBron James, and Justin Bieber. They weren't just being endorsed, they were being worn as a badge of cool, a mandatory accessory for anyone who was anyone. The product became a walking billboard, and the billboards were the most famous people in the world. This wasn't advertising, it was product placement on a global, organic scale, creating an aura of exclusivity and desirability that money simply couldn't buy. The product itself was perfectly designed for this moment. The headphones were bold with their glossy black finish, red B logo, and sharp modern lines. They were unapologetically visible, the exact opposite of the discreet, studio-focused cans they were competing against. They weren't meant to be hidden away, they were meant to be seen. And the sound profile was engineered for mass appeal, not critical accuracy. The audio was heavily bass-boosted, perfect for the hip-hop, pop, and electronic music that dominated the charts. It was a sound that felt exciting and powerful, especially to listeners accustomed to the thin, tinny output of cheap earbuds. Audiophiles derided them as overpriced and sonically unbalanced, but that critique entirely missed the point. Beats weren't selling sound quality, they were selling an identity. You weren't paying for drivers and magnets, you were paying for the feeling of being part of the in crowd, for the sensation of having a direct line to the coolest music on earth. The result was nothing short of a revolution. Beats by Dre completely disrupted the entire headphone industry, creating a multi-billion-dollar market for lifestyle audio products where none had existed before. They made headphones a fashion item, an essential piece of personal branding. The company's success was so monumental that it attracted the attention of Apple Inc., which acquired Beats for a staggering $3 billion in 2014, the largest acquisition in Apple's history at the time. The deal wasn't just for a headphone company, it was for a cultural phenomenon, a marketing machine, and a roster of talent that included Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine themselves. The man who had once produced records in Compton was now one of the wealthiest figures in the history of hip-hop, not from his music alone, but from his unparalleled understanding of how to sell an experience. The Beats story is the ultimate modern endorsement tale because Dre wasn't endorsing something he used, he was endorsing something he was. He sold a piece of his own mythology, and in doing so, he convinced an entire generation that the key to musical authenticity could be purchased for a few $100s and worn around your neck. But if Dr. Dre showed us the power of building a brand from scratch with authentic credibility, our next endorsement is a masterclass in an entirely different strategy, one where a brand simply borrows an existing aura of cool, plastering it onto a product with which it has absolutely no logical connection. To see this in action, we have to travel back to a galaxy far, far away, or at least to the smoky, neon-lit bars that wished they were. In the wake of The Empire Strikes Back, one character emerged as the absolute pinnacle of effortless, risk-taking suavity, Lando Calrissian. And the actor who brought him to life, Billy D. Williams, found that his newly minted galactic charm was the perfect commodity to sell back here on Earth, specifically to the thirsty patrons of local liquor stores. This is the story of a partnership so bizarrely effective that it forever linked the smooth-talking administrator of Cloud City with the potent kick of Colt 45 malt liquor. The genius of this pairing was in its sheer, brazen audacity. On the surface, what could a sophisticated interstellar smuggler and gambler possibly have to do with a cheap, high-alcohol beverage typically sold in 40-ounce bottles? The connection wasn't logical, it was purely atmospheric. Billy D. Williams didn't just have acting chops, he possessed an inimitable, silky smooth persona. His voice was a warm, inviting baritone. His smile was disarming and hinted at a secret he might just share with you. He exuded a specific kind of cool that was both approachable and impossibly glamorous. He was the guy you wanted to be, or at least have a drink with. The marketers at Colt 45 weren't selling the taste of their malt liquor, let's be honest, that was a losing battle. They were selling a feeling, an attitude. They were selling the idea that by holding a bottle of Colt 45, you were tapping into a little slice of Lando Calrissian's unflappable, ladies' man confidence. The commercials themselves were minimalist masterpieces of this vibe-based marketing. They often featured Williams in a sharp suit, leaning against a bar or sitting on a stool, holding the familiar yellow-labeled bottle. He wouldn't shout or make outrageous claims. Instead, he'd look directly into the camera, a knowing glint in his eye, and speak in that signature, relaxed cadence. The most famous and enduring slogan was a simple, smooth declaration: Colt 45, it works every time. The brilliance of this line was in its beautiful ambiguity. What works every time? The beverage's ability to get you drunk, sure, that was a given. but the true implication, the one sold by William's effortless delivery, was so much more. It was the idea that this drink was a reliable wingman, a catalyst for social success, a magic potion that would guarantee a good time, smooth over any awkwardness, and perhaps even help you charm your way into someone's heart. It was a promise of results sold by the one man who seemed to have life completely figured out. This campaign ran for years, and its success lay in its potent, if ridiculous, fantasy. For the price of a few dollars, a young adult could walk into a party not as themselves, but as a version of the coolest guy in the room, all thanks to the liquid courage in a bottle blessed by Billy D. Williams. The absurdity of a Star Wars hero shilling for malt liquor was part of the charm. It was so overtly commercial, so transparent in its goals, that it somehow looped back around to being iconic. Williams never seemed to phone it in either. He delivered every line with the same sincerity and charm he brought to the big screen, treating the product with a respect it almost certainly didn't deserve. This endorsement created a cultural artifact that has outlived its initial run, a permanent, slightly ironic fixture in the landscape of pop culture. It proved that a strong enough persona could be transferred to almost any product, no matter how incongruous, as long as the star was willing to sell the dream with a smile and a smooth-talking promise that it works every time. And so we arrive at our final, and perhaps most perfectly realized, entry on this journey through the absurd and the ingenious. After tales of cynical cash grabs and catastrophic miscalculations, we end with a story that feels less like an endorsement and more like an inevitable conclusion. This is the saga of Stone Cold Steve Austin, the toughest son of a gun to ever stomp a mud hole in the WWE, and his venture into the world of craft brewing with Broken Skull IPA. In a landscape cluttered with forced partnerships, Austin's move stands apart as a masterclass in authenticity, a modern trend where the celebrity doesn't just lend their name, they build the product from the ground up in their own unmistakable image. To understand why this works so brilliantly, you have to first appreciate the mythology of Steve Austin. For years, his character wasn't just a wrestler, he was a blue-collar folk hero for the ages. The Texas Rattlesnake was the ultimate anti-authority figure, a beer-swilling, middle-finger-raising rebel who spoke his mind and backed it up with a devastating stone-cold stunner. His post-victory ritual was as iconic as any championship belt. He'd stand in the center of the ring, battered and triumphant, and demand his beers, and they'd come flying in a seemingly endless supply of Steve Weisers, which he'd crack open, pour down his throat, and then crush against his forehead in a cascade of foam and defiance. Beer wasn't just a prop in his act, it was a fundamental part of his character's DNA, a symbol of celebration, rebellion, and blue-collar reward after a hard-fought battle. For decades, the beer in those cans was, of course, a prop, likely non-alcoholic or just water. But the association was so powerful, so deeply ingrained in the psyche of millions of fans, that the logical next step wasn't a sponsorship deal with a major brewery. That would have felt cheap, like Bob Barker endorsing a pet store. The only move that made sense was for Austin to create his own beer, to build a brand that was, from the first hop to the last, 100% stone cold. And that's exactly what he did. Partnering with the El Segundo Brewing Company in California, Austin didn't just stick his face on a label. He was deeply involved in the crafting process, insisting on a specific, robust flavor profile that matched his no-nonsense persona. The result was Broken Skull IPA, named after his ranch in South Texas. The genius of Broken Skull IPA is in its utter lack of pretense. This isn't a light, easy-to-drink lager. It's a strong, intensely hoppy India Pale Ale that clocks in at 7% alcohol by volume. It's a beer for people who actually like the taste of beer, a declaration of intent that perfectly mirrors Austin's straightforward, take no prisoners attitude. The branding is equally authentic. The can is simple and rugged, featuring his iconic skull logo and the name in no-frills lettering. There are no flashy graphics or attempts to court a trendy, unfamiliar audience. This is a beer made by Steve Austin for Steve Austin's fans. In his promotional materials, he doesn't use flowery language to describe the tasting notes. He looks into the camera, cracks one open, and in that familiar gravelly drawl tells you it's a damn good beer. The message is clear. If it's good enough for the toughest bastard in the room after a fight, it's good enough for you on your damn couch. This represents the apex of a new era in celebrity endorsements. It's the antithesis of the Sybil Shepherd beef debacle or the cynical quick trim saga. Austin isn't pretending to use a product, he is the product. His credibility is the entire foundation of the brand. There is no gap between the man and the marketing, because the marketing is an extension of the character he spent decades building with genuine passion and authenticity. When you drink a Broken Skull IPA, you're not just having a beer, you're participating in a 20-year-old ritual. You're sharing a cold one with Stone Cold. It feels less like a consumer transaction and more like an inside joke with an old friend. A perfect and satisfying capstone to a career built on giving the people exactly what they wanted. In a world of absurd celebrity endorsements, Steve Austin's beer is the least absurd thing imaginable. It's the real damn deal. And so we reach the end of our wild ride through the most absurd, ingenious, and occasionally unsettling moments in American celebrity endorsement history. From William Shatner's surreal pajama-clad pitches for Priceline to the chilling downfall of Subway's Jared, we've seen the full spectrum of what happens when fame meets commerce. We've witnessed brilliant alignments of persona and product, like George Foreman's grinning domination of the home kitchen and Chuck Norris's zen-like mastery of the total gym. We've cringed at spectacular miscalculations, like the Olsen twins' foray into Walmart fashion and Sybil Shepherd's beef industry confession. And we've explored the ethically murky waters of campaigns that exploited trust, from Robert Young's doctorly advice for Sanka to the Kardashian-Jenner clan's sugary, blue gummy bears. This journey reveals a fascinating truth about consumer culture. A celebrity's power isn't just about their talent, it's about the stories we project onto them. We buy the grill not just because George Foreman is a champion, but because we want a piece of that champion's transformative potential in our own kitchen. We trust the skincare advice from a television mom because we crave the order and care she represented in our living rooms each week. These endorsements work, whether brilliantly or bafflingly, because they tap into something deeper than logic. They tap into our emotions, our aspirations, and our desire to connect with the icons we admire, even if that connection is as thin as a paid television spot. Yet, as the decades have rolled on, the game has evolved. We've moved from the straightforward, if bizarre, television commercials of the 70s and 80s to the complex, authenticity-obsessed landscape of today, where stars like Danny Trejo and Steve Austin build entire brands from their own lived-in personas. The lesson seems to be that the most enduring successes aren't about slapping a famous face on any random product. They're about a genuine, believable fusion of the person and the thing they're selling. The most catastrophic failures, on the other hand, almost always stem from a jarring disconnect, a moment where the curtain is pulled back to reveal the cynical transaction underneath, shattering the illusion we were all willing to buy into. So the next time you see a famous person smile from a package or a screen, pitching something with rehearsed sincerity, take a second to look past the glow of their stardom. Ask yourself what story they're really selling. Is it a story of transformation, of belonging, of reliability, or is it simply a story of a paycheck? The history of these endorsements is a testament to our incredible capacity as consumers to believe, but it's also a powerful reminder to be aware of the magic being worked on us. The power of fame to shape what we buy and why is immense, but the power to decide what we truly value remains, as it always has, our own. Now we want to hear from you. What's the most bizarre, hilarious, or unforgettable celebrity endorsement that's ever stuck with you? Was it a pitch so odd it became brilliant, or a deal so cynical it made you cringe? Share your favorites in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going.